Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to the first public meeting to explore how the CFTC should rebuild its customer education, protection, and outreach program as required by the Dodd-Frank Act. I've organized this meeting today as a way to initiate a dialogue among individuals, organizations, and fellow regulators at the forefront of the most successful financial literacy, education, and outreach programs to advise the Commission as to how it should establish a quality consumer education and outreach program. It would be foolish for the Commission to try and attempt to establish a program out of whole cloth without consulting the experts first. I'm overwhelmed by the experience and expertise we have assembled on our panels today. Not only do we have representatives from 6 of our federal financial regulators, but we have representatives from the CFA Institute, the Options and Industry Council, National Futures Association, the self-regulatory organization to the futures industry, AARP, Stebbin & Company, the American Savings Education Council, the Employee Benefits Research Institute, the National Endowment for Financial Education, the Financial Fraud Enforcement Task Force, MetLife, FINRA, the American Institute of CPAs, and the North American Securities Administrators Association. The Dodd-Frank has radically expanded our responsibilities. Today, the CFTC has a mandate to oversee the nearly $300 trillion U.S. Notional swaps market, coupled with the requirements to thwart detection and prevent violations of the CEA, and regulations to establish a new whistleblower and consumer education program. Alongside this, commodities have become the new favored class, with consumers seeking exposure to metals, oil and gas, agriculture products, and currencies. In many cases, consumers are not well informed about the fees, investment strategies, or the structure of the investment itself. The Commission is preparing to reorganize itself to meet these challenges. The Commission has established an internal working group, and I'm pleased that my counsel, Laura Gardy, is part of that team, which held its first meeting on Tuesday. The meeting today will attempt to leverage your collective wisdom, and I intend to continue this dialogue as our program develops and matures. Laura will continue to serve as the conduit between the external information gathering efforts and the internal working group. I recognize that establishing an effective program is much more than filling out a few boxes on an org chart. I believe that there are 3 basic elements we need to figure out as we organize the CFTC program. First, we need your recommendations as to how to establish an effective public outreach program. What are the steps we need to take in developing a program aimed at enlightening the public as to their rights, their responsibilities, and their risks in the market? Second, we will only be successful if we establish a program that is organizationally effective and efficient within our own building. In other words, we need your assistance in establishing an effective consumer and whistleblower organization that can resolve consumer issues in a rapid manner, and we must leverage technology to automate our process to track, manage, and analyze our complaints, and to ensure that the correct offices are on the job. Third, we must develop a program that works cooperatively with the self-regulatory organizations and other regulators. This will require that we continue to work with our friends at NFA and exchanges and clearinghouses, which have responsibility to serve and regulate the future swaps and options market, as well as the SEC, the FTC, DOJ, and state regulators. The good news is that we are not doing this alone. I do believe it's important to note that the Dodd-Frank Act did not include CFTC-regulated products under the umbrella of, quote, consumer financial products or services that will be regulated by the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. However, the Dodd-Frank Act did give us something. It amended the Commodity Exchange Act by adding Section 23G, which establishes within the U.S. Treasury a fund that will be available to the CFTC for the payment of whistleblower awards and education initiatives. This new fund will be fully funded by civil monetary penalties collected by the Commission's enforcement program. To give you an idea as to the potential funds available during fiscal year 2010, the CFTC's enforcement efforts resulted in imposing more than $163 million in civil monetary penalties. I have a lot of experience with federal appropriation, and I have been very vocal as to how the Commission ought to be using its funds. In times of tight resources, when you get a non-appropriated funding, it's important to act immediately to take advantage of that, and we shouldn't waste any time before we get the ball rolling. In the interest of time, I propose that we do that right now. We have 3 panels on the agenda today. The first panel will focus on identifying the gaps in current consumer education and outreach initiatives to be filled by the CFTC. Second panel will focus on the benefits of having consumer education and outreach, and the third panel will explore the communications and messaging and outreach. I'll begin each panel with a panelist introduction. I'll have you introduce yourself and explain the organizations you represent. And I've asked each panel to briefly present their views as to what the CFTC needs to think about as it defines the scope of consumer education protection. Then we'll kind of have an open discussion among the panelists on the various topics. I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your knowledge and experience with the Commission. I'd especially like to thank Ken McDonald of ASEC, who's assisted my staff in putting together these panels, ensuring we have the right folks at the table. I'd also like to thank Kathy Floyd at the SEC, who's worked closely with my staff to ensure that we have all the right questions. Let me close there, and let's begin with the first panel here. I'm just going to, if you can go around in order, go clockwise here. We'll start with Larry. Let's just make introductions first, and then we'll go around and make your brief presentation, if you will. Thank you.
My name is Larry Dykman. I'm the Director of Communications and Education at National Futures Association. As Commissioner Amalia stated in his opening remarks, NFA is the self-regulatory organization for the U.S. futures industry.
I'm Gina McFadden, President of the Options Industry Council. OIC is the options industry educational organization that is funded by the U.S. options exchanges and OCC, the Options Clearing Corporation.
I'm Michael Herndon with Financial Security, Manager of Financial Security at AARP, membership association for people 50 plus.
I'm Bud Haslett, and I'm the Head of Risk Management and Derivatives for CFA Institute. We're a global organization of investment professionals that has approximately 100,000 members and 200,000 candidates in our program.
I'm Lori Schock. I'm the Director of the Office of Investor Education and Advocacy at the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. My office has three primary roles. We have an active investor education program. Also, we have input into policy and rulemaking at the SEC from the individual investor perspective. And then also we handle, through our assistance program, investor complaints and questions that come in.
Good morning. Excuse me. I'm John Grady. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Stebbin & Company. We're a commodity pool operator located in Rockville, Maryland, and we offer 4 funds to investors. We've been in business since 1989 and have about $2 billion in investor capital across our 4 funds.
Thank you very much. I'm reminded by our tech guys, you've all done this before, but I think we can only support 2 or 3 microphones on at a time. Little button, red button will take care of that. Blackberries are poison to these things, so you can keep them on. I'm keeping mine on, but just keep them away from the mics. So panel 1, identifying gaps in consumer education and outreach to be filled by the CFTC. Let's go around. I've asked everyone to do 3 to 5 minutes on their views and recommendations for us. Frankly, this is a learning opportunity for us. We do have many of our staff back here that are going to be charged with establishing our consumer program. And so they're listening, we're listening, and we greatly appreciate the input each of the panels are going to provide to us today, and look forward to continued working with you. So Larry, let's start with you, please.
Thank you. Well, NFA has been in operation since 1982, and consumer education is one of the critical elements of our mission of investor protection. In fact, we believe investor protection really begins with investor education. We've always said that. So we spend a lot of resources, as much as we can, delivering consumer education. I think one of the issues that we've always faced, one of the challenges we've faced that the CFTC is also going to face is defining your audience for these messages. There are several different audiences. The people that are going to really be interested in investing in futures, they need to know how the markets work, what protections are available to them, what the risks are involved, and how to do their due diligence. But there's a whole other audience out there that we've tried to reach that are just general, I'm going to call them the general public, who just need to know how to avoid investment fraud and fraudulent activities. And those are the 2 major types of audiences, and you kind of have to tailor your message to those two different types of audiences. We've been at it for about 29 years now, and one of the things we've learned is that the message itself of investor fraud and how to avoid investor fraud very rarely changes. It's a basic message. What's been changing so much over the past few years, and especially in the last few years, is the method that you get that message out. The technology and all the different methods now that are available to reach the investors has changed dramatically, and the way you do it, and the investors' attention spans and how they get their information is changing rapidly. And so you really need to look at your audience and how they're getting their message, and how best to use those technologies to get the message out to them. So I'm really happy to be here and express our experiences and the lessons we've learned in the 29 years.
If you would elaborate a little bit, and I appreciate you keeping it tight, but this method for outreach, I'm also the chairman of the Technology Advisory Committee, so the technology and the internet, the whole thing is, what do we need to be thinking about in terms of, I assume it, the internet is now the main tool.
Sure, it's electronic.
Do we put all our resources in internet best? Is there a
there's still a place for a printed brochure. We give them out, obviously. We used to, in the years past as a history, you give out hundreds of thousands of these brochures. And now people just go to our website and download it. It's a PDF. They download it. And sometimes when we're at investor conferences, people will come up and say, "Oh, can I get this? Is this on your website?" And I'll say, "Yeah." And they said, "Okay, I'll just go download it because that's just easier and more convenient." But also you need to look at new technologies, like how can you reach people using Facebook? Do you go on Twitter and do tweets? There are lots of other ways to do it. Are there blogs? Are there bulletin boards? You'd be surprised how you can put a message out there, and without you doing much of anything else, it gets spread all over the place. People pick it up, people retweet it, people put it on their blog, and all of a sudden this brochure that you've posted on your website, the awareness of it just expands exponentially through really not a lot of your effort, but just because of the way people get messages and communicate with each other now.
Is I assume you have, with regard to fraud, people who have been defrauded. So how do you have people looking to say, well, how do I not become a victim, or do you generally find I just got taken, now I'm going to warn my fellow investors of
that's
this
a good
harm?
question. That's a very good question, and I think we get a little of both. I think the challenge really is to reach the people before they get swindled. Unfortunately, that's challenging, and we do get a lot of people who contact us after the fact, and that's unfortunate. But it does balance out. But I think more people, we try to get to them before they are swindled.
Yeah, great. Gina, you want to?
Yes, thank you first for the opportunity to participate today. OIC was formed in 1992 by the options exchanges and OCC to really bring back some of the volume that was lost after the 1987 crash. And what better way to do that than to educate investors? And what we do is we are the unbiased centralized source for balanced information about options. We talk about both risks and the benefits of exchange-listed equity options. And when we started with a videotape. This is almost 19 years ago, and that was, a way to educate. And we held about 30 live seminars throughout the U.S. Now, fast forward 19 years later, we've made a lot of changes over the years. Nobody's interested in that videotape anymore. We still do live seminars. We do about 50 evening seminars throughout the U.S. and Canada. We also hold all-day Saturday investor education days that are very popular. That's one way to reach out. But the best way is through the internet. So we have a very robust website with all sorts of offerings. We have webcasts, we have podcasts, we have trading tools like a virtual trading system. We have every different level of options class that you might be interested in. And we have a customized e-learning program that, depending on your expertise, you can come in and set the level, what classes, what sequence you want to take. Now, we started out just reaching out to retail investors, and over the years we've expanded that to include financial advisors and institutional investors. And we don't deal with fraud. That's outside of our area of expertise, but certainly we feel very strongly that an educated investor is a step in that direction. So, you know, you've got an interesting challenge ahead of you, and I think you're on the right track by looking to identify, you know, who is your end customer? What is the scope? What do you want to cover? And what is the end goal? You know, our model has worked for us with the exchanges coming together and OCC and OIC supporting the education program for the options industry. It's been a successful model. It's a win-win for everyone. And I hope that some of our experiences would be helpful to you.
Thank you. Can I ask, I have two questions. One is, how have retail, there's more of I assume the more success you have, the more kind of retail participation you get. And how has that changed your education message? And the other question I want to ask is, do you get complaints of people being defrauded? And if you do, what do you do with them? And is that something that we need to work together on to make sure that you can at least you can have a venue to pass them to us, and we can understand?
For your first question, Commissioner, the investor has changed dramatically over the last 19 years. Not very educated in the beginning, but they are the ones who are looking for information. They're driving what we do. They're going to their brokers and saying, I want to trade, help me. And so brokers are getting educated as well. We listen to what they have to say. We do get a lot of feedback from them via surveys and tweeting. As a matter of fact, recently we had something on Facebook where we said, what would you like to hear in the next podcast? And it started this whole conversation going. And so that helps us. You know, in all of these surveys and feedback, you can improve your program, you can tweak what you have. It helps you recognize what's successful and what needs to be changed. So we do work with all of our investors, the advisors and the institutional side as well. Now, we do get calls, and we have a call center in place, an investor services call center. They operate 5 days a week. It's staffed by OCC employees. We have 2 locations, so we have a backup. They're talented individuals. They love options. They love talking about them. And the calls we get are questions about strategies. Of course, we don't give any advice, any trading advice, but we do help them walk through the concepts. Options are complicated. There's contract adjustment issues. They talk about those, help them through that. And if there are complaints, we typically refer them back to their broker-dealer. That's as far as we take it.
Would there be concerns if you were trying to help customers and clients? You don't have clients, but you know, kind of the people you provide service to. If you referred them to us, would there be an issue of trust that I'm trying to get information from you, but if I think that?
Well, OIC is on the SEC regulated product side, but you know, wherever they can get help, yeah, we'd be glad to refer them.
Thank you. Michael?
Yes, I'm going to start off with a little bit of, always love telling this story. It's a bit of folksy history about AARP. Back in the 50s, there was a retired high school principal in California. She was the first female high school principal in the state. She was retired in her 70s and went to visit a friend who had been a teacher. And so the story goes that she tried to find this woman's house and realized that actually where it was a converted chicken coop in the backyard of another house. And this was a woman that she had taught school with. And this woman, career as a teacher, taught children how to read and write. and was spending her retirement years living in a converted chicken coop. She was sick. She couldn't get health insurance. So Ethel Percy Andrus, in her 70s, said, I'm going to do something about this. From that has sprung an organization of almost 40 million members, has been around for 50 years, and has had quite an impact, we hope, on the lives of people 50 plus, certainly retirees. So I would start off as the good news is if you've decided you can do something about this, there is hope. I would say some of the bad news is that it's not easy. It's not been easy for AARP to accomplish a lot of what we have done over the years. It's taken a lot of hard work from our members, our volunteers, and our staff. As far as consumer education, one of the things that we have just sort of recently gone through is looking at our membership again. And with that many people, you obviously have to be very careful, and as someone said about deciding what your audience is. We've broken our membership out into 8 segments. We sort of start off with the first tier saying, are they in the workforce or not? If they're not, if they are currently in the workforce, do they have children at home or not? Then we break those segments down and say, are they struggling or not? Are they preparing for retirement very well, or are they just sort of making ends meet? If they don't have, if they're not in the workforce, they're not likely to have children at home. If they're retired, do we say, are they sort of in the reflective years, the very sort of latest stages in life? Are they more in the golden years of retirement where they're traveling? Are they making ends meet or not? So we've broken those out into 8 segments. But those are just sort of the 8 segments of our members. Then we have to think about, okay, these within that segment, somebody is African American. Somebody is living in the state of Wyoming, which reaching them is going to be very different than reaching someone who lives in New York City. So for us, it's a very complex sort of way. How do we engage all of our members around these consumer issues? So there's multiple channels that we employ at AARP, our state offices, the publications that we have that go out to them. We try to get our own earned media through research and having the press cover us. We have a call center. People can call us. We have a number of ways that we can reach our members, and trying to find the exact messages that reach those people in the right place, in the right segment, designed around where they are at the time, is no easy feat. So it's certainly not going to be for you in ramping up the entire American public, which is a much broader segment of how you're going to do that. So there's obviously lots of layers of thinking about, specifically this person in Cheyenne, Wyoming, how am I going to reach them? And I would also say that you're going to be competing against a number of messages. There are, and I just listed down, just sort of in thinking about the questions that Laura had sent us, and I just sort of off the top of my head came up with 15 different regulators that have some sort of financial education effort. And that's 15 messages just from the regulators. And I doubt your message budget is as big as, let's say, Procter & Gamble, which has literally in the billions of dollars to spend on advertising. And that's just one company who's trying to get people to spend. And then you've got Merrill Lynch saying, invest with us. You've got Walmart saying, spend with us. So you're competing against not only each other, you're competing against the messages of spend, invest, security. We can help you reach security in retirement and financial happiness. So in doing that, there's obviously a lot of looking at the consumer with the right messages, trying to figure out how to get to them. And I think in the past at AARP, we have at times not focused on really what the consumer wanted out of us. We focused instead on our work. We have an office of this, therefore we're going to communicate to the consumer from that office. We have an Office of Financial Security, or my security team. So our issues, we were trying to communicate to them, not based upon how they're living their lives. A person's probably not sitting around thinking of futures and commodities as much as they are, I've got to put my kids through college. That's a money issue, and then from there. So an example of what we've done recently is our retirement calculator. AARP had one of the retirement calculators just because we're AARP. It got lots of press, lots of traffic. We got usually congratulated on it because it took into all these considerations. We had about a 2% completion rate. Great traffic. People went to the website to start this calculator. 2% of people would actually complete it. So in some degrees it was successful because we got people to it, but were we really having any impact? So we went back and did some focus group testing, asked people, what are you willing to do and sit there, and what do you want out of it? Do you want to have all these things sort of pre-populated for you? How do you want it explained to you? So we really took the time to redesign our retirement calculator, and now we have about a 40% completion rate. So I would encourage anything you look at is to really focus in on what people are willing to do, how they want it presented to them. Don't just come at it from your bucket of issues. Think in the context of of their setting and where they are in life.
So what were the most effective tools to go from 2% to 40%? Was it the pre-population?
We have a lot of defaults now, things that people just did not understand. The old calculator would ask people to us, what is the rate of inflation that you're going to expect over the next 30 years? People don't know that. What sort of return do you expect? What we found was that people don't want to know. They don't want to take the time to figure that out. They want you to pre-populate it for them, but they want you to explain it to them. So we have a lot of the hover boxes, explanations of here's what we're going to put in for you, and here's why. It allows them to feel like if they want, and we allow also for them to change it. So I can change any of these numbers that I want. And then we just took the time to make it more, the graphics of it look better. We stripped out a lot of the things that we expect them to go through. So when it comes to the tools and communications, think about that as that you've got, maybe it's 3 really important messages you need to get out to people. And how are they that's what they're going to be listening for. So a lot of it could be superfluous beyond that. Another issue to bring up is that we're starting to do Social Security webinars. We get about 6,000 to 8,000 people register for the webinar and about 800 to 900 that will attend at any point of it. 45 minutes of presentation and then 15 minutes of Q&A. We've just switched to this new system, and I've actually sat there and tried to, manage the Q&A portion of the questions coming in, not actually answering them, just sitting in there and saying, thank you for asking a question. We will get about 100 questions before the event begins. All the questions, they're going to be answered in this presentation, but people seem to be very focused on their situation. Even though you're going to tell them, at 62 you can claim Social Security, your full benefits will kick in at a certain age depending on when you were born. If you've been married, you have to be married for 10 years. We're going to answer all of that, but they're not thinking that. They're thinking, here is my situation. I'm 58, my husband's 62, we live in Alabama, and here's our situation with this question. So we're struggling with how do we sort of attend to that, really attend to the individual where they are in their mind, even though we're going through all this. We've got all this information and stuff for you. They're not listening to that quite yet. They're still focused on where they are.
Well, my little anecdotal story, when I started working on Capitol Hill many years ago, I had the responsibility of answering the mail. And it was for Social Security issues. And it was the notch babies and some of these other kind of things that it was very itemized, very individual specific. It wasn't about so much about, you'd get the AARP mailing effort that would, drive direction and have the postcards and everything else. But by and large, you spend a lot of time focusing on individual personal concerns on that. Well, I must commend you. You all have been very effective. Every time I go home to my parents' house, there's always an AARP something laying around. So you've captured my parents for sure. So I'm going home this weekend. I'll see if you're
very good,
continuing your success. It just occurred to me when I was doing this. AARP is obviously a huge organization. If you don't mind, and to the extent you know it, and maybe it's appropriate afterwards, I'd like to get a sense of kind of the budgets that you all commit to this. And maybe it's not, maybe you're comfortable sharing it here, but if you're not comfortable sharing it openly right now, then that's fine. If you don't mind sending it to us afterwards, or give us some sense of what we're looking at.
Well, I will say. For AARP, it's difficult to say what we spend on this because we approach an issue from so many different facets. We have a magazine that might run a short article on it. We have at least one office in every state that might do an event or something to try to get some earned media. We have a call center that can send you a brochure or answer some brief questions. We do some programmatic things with employers. So it would be you might find there's probably some matrix person within AARP that could sort of look across the association But for us, it's, certainly, even with millions of dollars in our budget, we have, ARP has a $1.2 billion budget, 2,400 employees nationwide. Even within that, it's very difficult for us to reach our members because they're in all these different places, all these different issues, and we're not top of mind even for our own members. So a federal regulator is going to be, even much. The SEC can't give you a discount on your next cruise. So we have the advantage of sort of being in there on the cruise and then trying to get you some messages about safe investing. How else are you going to come in and talk about safe investing as a regulator? That's your only message. So
We do provide free coffee.
I'm Bud Hazlitt, and I work for the CFA Institute. It's a real honor to be here, and it's a real privilege to be able to work for CFA Institute. The Institute was founded back in 1963, and its big calling is to administer the Chartered Financial Analyst program. And as of this year, we'll have approximately 200,000 candidates taking the program. We have 100,000 members, and it's really founded upon twin pillars of strength, ethics and education. And it's very challenging for us because we are a global organization, and there's different policies in different countries, different tax aspects. But one of the things that we have an issue with is that there is a growing body of investment knowledge, and we have to find out some way to determine whether our candidates are qualified or not in that expanding global body of investment knowledge. And so we take a lot of care in developing curriculum that's strong in derivatives. However, there is a certain limit of how deep we can go being a generalist program. And so what we do is we have a very robust continuing education program where we offer many different resources for our members, candidates, and the general public. And it's interesting, early on, much of our material was developed in-house or requested from different sources. Now we're starting to change our policy a little bit. And so what we're doing is we're becoming what we call curator of information. And what that is that's going out and selecting the best information that's out there. I know Gina works for the Option Industry Council. That's what my background is. I was an options market maker for 20 years. And so I use much of her information. I provide a link to our members, and they can go in and use some of the valuable tools that are there. I also have some things for the National Futures Association, and so I think this is an issue that really has to be addressed. For the CFTC to go and create all this knowledge is going to be very, very challenging. Yet if you become a curator of the knowledge that's already out there, selecting the material that is valuable and important to your target market, then that makes it much more reasonable of a task.
Is a lot of your education done online now?
Yes, a lot of it is online. The actual exam is a physical exam. So we have societies in 135 different countries, but the education is online, and the content is actually going online. Also, the CFA program stack of books. We have 3 different levels, so it used to be that high, and now we're providing it in ebook format. Mm-hmm. So in addition to being sustainable as far as the resources that are used, it's convenient, and with the iBooks and everything, it's much better.
Great. How has there been a shift in focus? Commodities increasing over the last couple of years largely have been an increasing focus. Is that something that you've had to adapt your programs to, or do you see people focusing on that anymore?
Right. Well, one of our big issues is to have a well-diversified portfolio, so consisting of stock, bonds, and other alternative investments. And so the derivatives area would be an alternative to commodities or whatever. And so that's also an issue that needs to be addressed, is you can go and educate about a specific area, commodities or futures or whatever, but you also, in my opinion, should take a look at the broader category of asset allocation and what percentage of assets should be placed into these instruments, because you can know a lot about futures or options or whatever, but if you put 100% of your assets in there, you might be setting yourself up for disappointment in the future. Whereas if it's a part of a well-diversified portfolio, then that makes more sense from a risk management perspective.
So people say I've got Exxon and then I'm going to also invest in oil. Is that a well-diversified portfolio?
That would not be well-diversified, because you only have one stock and then you're doubling up with oil. But
I would think that doesn't. Not everybody would agree with you, but unfortunately,
right.
I agree with you. Lori, thank you.
The Office of Investor Education and Advocacy has grown over the years. We started off as a consumer affairs office at the SEC. Then we were the Office of Investor Education and Assistance. And a couple years ago, the name was changed to Advocacy, Office of Investor Education and Advocacy, because of our input into rulemaking. So we have been in existence now for over a decade in this role, but it's something that has grown and matured. So as you're starting your program, first of all, congratulations with your funding structure. I think that's wonderful and will allow you to have a very robust program for education as well as for your whistleblower office. If I were in your shoes, I would start with research to know what's out there, what messages are effective, and then also what gaps are there and how you can fill them. I think there's a fair amount of investor confusion between products. I think there are products that we have jurisdiction over, and then there are products that you have jurisdiction over, and when people have run into trouble, they contact us, and then we make referrals over to the CFTC, and vice versa. And I think that just is going to grow and grow as commodity-based ETFs. I don't think people realize those are not, the SEC does not have jurisdiction over those. So it's a challenge.
Well, we've made it so easy for them. We just published the 300-page products definition.
That's right.
Be crystal clear in everybody's mind.
Exactly. And so, I just think that's something going forward that you are well positioned to help fill in some of the gaps. But I would really look at the research and know where the investor confusion is, and then working on filling the gaps. I also have to say, as a matter of policy, I must disclaim any comments I make here today. They are not reflective of the commission or the commission staff. And Kathy, I'm going to disclaim for you too, so you don't have to say it on your panel. So, all right, perfect. But I did look at our investor complaints over the past 18 months, and we had over 500 complaints. We handle around 70 to 80,000 on an annual basis that were sort of CFTC related. And so I think that's indicative of some of the investor confusion that's out there.
500 complaints seem low, and I don't, and based on the confusion and the number of investors in the market, and obviously that seems to be that's our challenge, right? To make sure that people are using our resources so we can fight fraud, we can fight these abuses. If only 500 people are coming to you in this case, and I think the SEC is a little bit more well-known and certainly on the front line where people are in the stock market, et cetera. Where are they going? Do they rant and rave on your websites and say, I've been hit by this stuff, I wish there was somebody I could call? I mean,
unfortunately, I think there's a fair amount of underreporting in this area, that people just sum it up that, it was a bad investment decision, even if it was outright fraud. We found that through other research. And then I think people just don't know who to complain to, so they do nothing. The tens of thousands that we deal with on an annual basis, I don't have any idea then of the whole total universe of people that have had problems that don't contact anyone. Right.
In terms of structuring your message, and Bud mentioned being a curator of information, which I think is a great idea, especially in our early stages. How do you tailor your message? I mean, how do you write to them? What level is it? all on one page? You try to keep it on one page, and is there an education level you're shooting for to make sure that everybody gets it? And I would assume your constituency is a little different. I think probably, it's a professional association, right? So
Right. So our perspective is that if you educate the investment professionals, then they can assist the individual and client make good decisions.
So Lori, what's your technique?
Ours is pretty much, we focus on, we don't give advice, so as a regulator we can't do that, but we focus on fees, an anti-fraud message, and then also this overall risk management concept. And so we do tailor, there are particular programs that we do that are tailored towards certain audiences. Like we participate with the Finner Foundation and AARP and the State Securities Regulator with the Outsmarting Investment Fraud Program, which is tailored towards 55 to 65-year-olds, so as people are in pre-retirement or just in early retirement, because we know the devastation that occurs if they're a victim of fraud at that age. Then we have other messages that are tailored towards teachers. These are complex issues. I don't want to say that we don't dumb down the message, but I think we do try to write at about an 8th grade reading level so that there's comprehension, because we are a disclosure-based system, so we need to have clarity, though, in those disclosures. Otherwise, they're not meaningful. We found through some investor complaints or just comments and suggestions that the SEC.gov website was too convoluted for the ordinary person to find the information that was for investor education, because we have so much other regulatory information in places for issuers and those who are registered with the SEC who needed to do their business. So we set up a microsite called investor.gov, which is tailored specifically to the retail investor and investor education, to have these simplified messages that deal with these issues. And we have topical issues, such as certain products. Then we have someone investing concepts, asset allocation, risk management. Then we have, how to avoid fraud and things like that.
And this investor.gov, it's, I assume, one of your lead click-throughs on your main
On the
first
main
page.
site.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
right. And without trying to drive any traffic to it, we launched it initially in 2009 and then spent a fair amount of money this year relaunching it and revamping it. We still had tens of thousands of people who came to it monthly without any advertising. So now we hope to be a bit more forward in our advertising of it.
Okay, great.
To raise awareness.
Thank you. John, I think there was a comment, was it Michael maybe, that made a comment about saving for college and some of these other kind of things, but making these big choices about how they're informed, and I think you've got some experience in this.
And my perspective and my firm's perspective is that of a pooled vehicle operator. And so the fact is, anything that we do is always influenced by either the perception or the reality. We have a salesman's stake in what we're talking about. So we start with the idea that that underneath what we're trying to communicate at some level is a sales context. But if we don't do the education and, more importantly, differentiation that we engage in, then our message is itself too confusing, not clear. Our prospectus alone is over 100 pages. Nobody is going to truly sort of distill that themselves without some help from us. Now, sort of one step back to explain how we operate. We wholesale. We don't market to the actual investing public. So an AARP member would know about us through their broker or advisor, not because we've marketed to them, which means we're spending all of our time educating the broker and the advisor. And we develop those materials to differentiate ourselves from commodity ETFs. We're managed futures funds. So we want to differentiate ourselves from things out there that are also pooled vehicles, that are also trying to get a share of wallet or a share of the public's attention and a place in the allocation. I mean, if there's a salesman's stake in any of this, it's to ultimately find a place in the portfolios of savers, investors, spenders, because it's, like Willie Sutton, we're going to go where the money is. But to be there, as I said, with a salesman's stake, so we have to invent our own tools to do that. And one of the things that I thought about in coming here was the mutual fund experience, and I grew up in the fund business more so than in the commodity pool business, the remarkable effects of being a mainstream retirement plan option and also being sort of the monthly digest of topics in retail financial magazines, the Kiplingers, the Moneys, the Smart Moneys, did an enormous amount of educating for the industry, for the fund industry. So there was one dialogue going on in the public where there were people going underneath the hoods of mutual funds and writing stories about either careful what you're buying, you may not understand what you're getting, or labels are not always what you think they are. And at the same time, there was a dialogue going on among the regulators, really principally what was then the NASD, now FINRA, the SEC, and the mutual fund industry, about how to package that message so that an 8th grader can read it without just putting a giant number on a page and saying, if you want this, this is your fund. Because the fund industry often was susceptible to both sort of selling itself through rankings and selling itself through percentage numbers, to where call centers got requests for the 30% fund or the 9% fund. No one knew the name; they just knew the percentage associated with the returns. So one of the commission initiatives was to standardize the presentation of returns. I mean, a lot of these things that we're already doing were a product of a three-way dialogue, and in particular around the sales literature. We do most of our selling through private offerings, so there's not a lot of our sales literature that's in the public eye. We're educating, in effect, groups of financial professionals. But I do think that the power of a concentrated regulatory and regulated entity discussion around the literature, because that's where it gets boiled down and explained. It may be that our prospectus contains everything we need it, that you need it, that the NFA wants us to have, the SEC, FINRA, everybody has seen it, everybody has a share of say in what's in it. But the two-page document that comes to you at the end of the day that tries to explain it all, that's the piece of paper that I think you can have an enormous influence on, because I still think that people buy off that two-pager. They don't buy off the 100-pager. And developing, even in our own part of the business, some standardized terminology that helps us distinguish from long-oriented commodity pools or pools that are go everywhere but use a ton of leverage versus the managed futures strategy. As I said, we try to explain that. We try to differentiate ourselves, but we're also in a position where we're viewed as having something to sell, so that our information is not completely without some concern that we're just banging our own drum, if you will.
Can you talk about some of the confusion? Certainly within the last couple of years, people have been moving to commodity products, futures products, and there are some SEC products. There are some your products in this regulated space. Where are people being confused? Where are the pitfalls right now?
I think the one thing that's become true with respect to pooled vehicles is they've gone from being a means of diversifying your risk to a means of achieving an outcome. Now, that's not necessarily true with respect to every pooled vehicle, but more and more the emphasis is funds are tools to achieve a greater purpose. You don't own one, you own many. If you own many, you own them inside a fund of funds, or maybe you own them inside an allocation account. So there's a tendency to try to reduce a pooled vehicle to its purpose in your portfolio. What kind of tool is it? And in doing so, you can lose a lot of this of the subtlety of what that product is and what it's trying to do in the name of just trying to get a label on it that people can appreciate. So when we see the allocators, we see the broker-dealers and the advisory firms, and we're huge supporters of what they're doing. They are carrying out an education function and an investment allocation function for their clients that I think is really valuable. But at the same time, they need it to be explicable in a 4-minute meeting to somebody who they're sitting down with. I don't mean 4 minutes in total, but our product, if it gets 4 minutes in that meeting, is getting a lot of mind share time. So when we see funds, particularly mutual funds that have registered under the 40 Act, that are communicating a managed futures outcome, we're concerned that you've kind of flipped it from a process to an outcome. Managed futures, as much as anything, is a trading strategy, not an asset class. We actually get into lengthy discussions about what it is. Is it an investment strategy? Is it an asset class? It doesn't really fit into most allocation discussions to talk about an investment strategy. It's much easier for folks to categorize you as an asset class exposure, but we're a far cry from being long oil or something else that might be available to you in a commodity ETF or some other kind of purposeful vehicle. So our concern with the mutual fund side is that they really do have a path to public sales literature delivered without a prospectus in which a fund is talked about on one page. And you're not going to go into a subtle, lengthy discussion of what that fund is doing in one page. And that's notwithstanding the dialogue with FINRA and with the SEC, but that's the nature of mutual fund advertising. You can and you do reduce it to its simplest terms. To our thinking, those simplest terms have a danger of oversimplifying the managed future strategy.
What would you recommend? How do we fix it?
You know, I do think there's room. My own perception is there's not as much dialogue among the SEC, the CFTC, FINRA, and the NFA around the literature that we're using. Part of it is just the accident of our offering mechanisms, the level of expertise in the different agencies around our products, and the scope of the review that's been asked by NFA to perform, as well as sort of the mission of the other regulators in looking at our materials. So I'm somebody who actually thinks that more discussion and more coordinated review of our materials, not so much the prospectus materials, but the sort of nuts and bolts of the sales kit items is important.
Thank you very much. Any thoughts you have for any of the panelists, for other panelists, and Laura, if you have any thoughts you want to add? We're kind of at the end of this panel, and if we're going to keep it on schedule. But anybody? Go ahead, Jean.
I'd like to jump in here. Bud mentioned being the curator, and Lori agreed with that concept, and we certainly like that. At OIC, all of our offerings are free. We underwrite everything, and that's with the exception of one co-branded book. But everything else that's on our website, when we go out and teach live seminars, it's all free. And we leverage that by developing partnerships with other organizations. And Bud has worked with us. He uses our material. He's participated in some of our programs. The SEC does have a link to our website. So we partner with broker-dealers, universities, exchanges around the world, trying to just get the word out. We are glad to share everything that we have, everything that we've developed. As I said, it's free. People link to optionseducation.org. It's consistent, it's compliance approved, it just makes life easier. So my suggestion would be to leverage all the resources that are currently available.
Lord, as the SEC being the federal government, do you have a link to theirs, or is that a...
We do. I was looking around the table. I think we linked to everyone except for you, John.
Okay.
Sorry.
I get it. We link to you, though.
We do.
No, okay. NFA does something similar, links to others, or?
Yes, we have a page full of links to other regulators, other government agencies. I just agree with everyone here that just go out and see what all is available and leverage as much as possible instead of trying to recreate the wheel. I would say one other comment is Michael made some great comments about how AARP can go out and do studies with their members and find out exactly what the members or their customers want. It's much more challenging when you do not have a database of investors that you can go out and ask them what information they want, what information they need. So that you got to come at it a different way. But I wish we had that kind of database that we could contact.
But you have registrants, right?
Well, but those are member firms. If you want to reach the retail public, we just don't have that kind of a database. I'm sure it's the same on other government agencies.
This is kind of a technical question. Not technical, but I think a preference question. I frequently go through a website. I frequently read the content, but I rarely kind of go to the links page and then start exploring that at length. Is that a common problem, or do people usually click through on embedded links in the documents, or do they go to the links page?
Well, from AARP's perspective, our digital strategies team who creates our website realized that their mindset is they don't want people to link away from us. They want you to stay. Their metrics that they're being measured against are people are coming to our website and are staying there for quite some time. So we would much rather, for our purposes, selfish or not, whatever, good, bad, or indifferent, have that person come and read your content, the SEC's content, on our website. And that's, I think, for a lot of organizations, the individual office is going to be charged with how many people are coming to our site and visiting. So the linking is a different... And we've also tried to step away from saying people have to come to our website to read content. If the message is out there somewhere, that we've created or are concerned about people hearing, whether it's on somebody else's website, they were sharing among friends on Facebook and Twitter and those kinds of things, and then we've got to, let the content go where they are versus trying to have them come to us.
We actually offer our content two ways. It could be a link to OIC, or it could appear to be your own white-labeled education. We just want to get it out there, so whatever suits you.
Well, thank you very much. This could go on for hours, and I appreciate everybody's participation. We're going to get to the next panel. We're just going to swap out seats real quick and then start this process over again. Thank you very much for Panel 1's participation. I greatly appreciate the time. Ken, since you chose the hot seat, you're up.
Fabulous. Good morning, all, and again, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to present here. My name is Ken McDonnell, and I am with the American Savings Education Council, which is a program within the Employee Benefit Research Institute. EBRI is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, non-advocacy group that seeks to present just the facts and present a level playing field. Excuse me. I like to say ASEC was formed back in 1995. It is a coalition organization. It brings together public and private sector organizations to fulfill the mission of making savings and retirement planning a priority for all Americans. Thank you.
Good morning, and I'm very happy to be here. This really caps a series of financial literacy events that have occurred during the month of April, so I think this is a really wonderful panel, and thank you. My name is Karen Balesi, and I'm with the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which is a federal regulator of national banks, and I'm in the Community Affairs Department. I'm a manager there.
Good morning. My name is Ted Beck. I'm the President and CEO of the National Endowment for Financial Education. I'm also a member of the President's Council on Financial Capability, where I chair the Research and Evaluation Subcommittee.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, I'm Rob Adkins. I'm the Executive Director of the Financial Fraud Enforcement Task Force, which is an interagency task force created by the President back in November of 2009. It involves many of the folks at this table and in this room, as well as other state and local enforcement authorities.
Craig?
Good morning. I'm Craig Markham, and I represent the MetLife Broker-Dealer Group. We are 4 broker-dealers that are part of the MetLife Broker-Dealer Group. I serve as president of the 2 independent contractor firms, Walnut Street Securities and Tower Square Securities. And then I also serve as chief operating officer of the career broker-dealers, which are MetLife Securities and New England Securities.
Good morning. I'm Tanya Green, the Director of Consumer Compliance and Outreach at the National Credit Union Administration. And NCUA is the federal agency that charters federal credit unions, and we provide share insurance or a type of deposit insurance for those federal credit unions that we charter, and the majority of the state chartered credit unions within the United States.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here this morning. I'm Jean Hogarth. I'm the Manager of Consumer Education and Research within the Division of Consumer and Community Affairs at the Federal Reserve Board. I think people pretty much know what the Fed does, but within the Division of Consumer and Community Affairs, we're responsible right now for the rule writing and outreach efforts related to a number of consumer laws and regulations, truth in lending, equal credit opportunity, et cetera.
Good morning. I'm Luke Reynolds. I'm Acting Associate Director of the Division of Depositor and Consumer Protection at FDIC. I think everyone knows FDIC as well. Everyone today in this room knows FDIC. The role I'll talk about today is our financial education program, Money Smart.
Thank you. The topic of this panel is the benefits of having a consumer education and outreach program. Obviously, we've got those who are kind of the Fed chartered and federal responsibilities of the different entities. We obviously have different kind of customers and clients that we have to look out for in different, ranging from the credit unions to FDIC, et cetera. So this is a great panel. I know we come at it from approaching and capturing an education from a different standpoint in a little different areas. So I'm interested to hear the different kind of means and methods that you all use to really communicate to your members. And of course, we do have a private sector here that obviously that can reflect on how successful we are and what they see in the market with regard to our efforts. So I greatly appreciate everybody's participation here. Going to go around 2 to 5 minutes. Tell us what we need to know.
Well, at ASEC, what we do, as I conceive of it, we have a two-track. We have one which would be going to the professionals within financial capability. And in this role, we have two basic programs. We have our partners meeting, which we hold twice a year. And the idea behind that is to bring everyone in the room together, both private and public sector organizations that are working in this space, to get to know each other, network with each other, compare each other's notes, and try to learn from each other and form additional partnerships. We also have our government interagency group, which has been meeting since 1995. We meet 3 times a year. It's the federal government agency folks that work in this space. And for them to get to talk to each other, get to know each other, and find out what each other is doing, and again, form additional partnerships. We also do outreach efforts to the general public through our Choose a Save program. We've got about 90 PSAs that we have distributed across the country through various means. Some are some free channels like NFIB, some we pay for through Goodwill Communications. We also do a lot within the space of the internet. We have, my colleague Liz Buser has created our Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn pages. And we do a lot of outreach. Liz has developed a lot of social media campaigns designed around specific events such as America Saves Week, National Save for Retirement Week, National Retirement Planning Week. We try to utilize all of these as messages or vehicles to get the message out. We also tried to communicate with everyone as Ted Beck pulled together in August a colloquium of all of us in the profession to keep the conversation going on a regular basis. And we do this by the email alerts. And I frequently meet people when I'm out at these events, say, oh, I know you. I get an email from you about 4 or 5 times a month. The idea behind this is to keep the message going, keep the communication going, keep the conversation going. And also, I'd like to point out, EBRI sponsors along with Matthew Greenwald and Associates, an annual survey called the Retirement Confidence Survey. And what we have found out at the RCS in 2011, we looked at individuals and asked them, have you tried to engage in a simple financial education exercise of trying to find out how much you need to save for your retirement? And we find that 42% of Americans have tried to calculate how much they need to save for their retirement. What we found that 25% of workers who have done the calculation are very confident that they will be able to reach their goals, as compared with only 10% of those who have not done the calculation. So we find these exercises improves individuals' confidence, which is an important critical factor. We've also found that although those who have done the calculation find that they need to have a large amount of $1 million+ that doesn't seem to deter them. 26% of those who have done the calculation reported they are very confident that they'll be able to reach this amount that they needed, compared to only 11% who have figured out the amount that they needed. And we've also found that this leads to good behaviors overall. Those who have done the calculation have found that they have made changes to their retirement planning as a result. Most commonly, 59% report that they had started saving or investing more. 16% reported that they've reduced their debt or spending.
Thank you. One thing that occurred to me with so many feds here, one of the things I am interested in is how have you tapped the full resources of your agency? Because, frequently we get caught up in the opportunity to get caught up in a silo, and this is consumer outreach, but it doesn't leverage the full resources of the rest of the agency is always a challenge, I think. And then to the extent that you have an enforcement program, how do you use your enforcement program to A, pick the right cases, and B, make sure that those cases are communicated to the market and say, pay attention here. We've just defined, some landmark case law here. Be warned, we're coming after you, or stay away from this type of activity. So I'm interested to know that. We obviously have, and I should have gotten Laura to opine on that, because with Dodd-Frank, we have brand new case laws that we're going to be spending years upon years kind of picking the right cases and educating about our enforcement processes and our consumer efforts. So any thoughts you have on those two things? How do you make your office effective, and so we won't make the same early mistakes that you may have or you've resolved, and then C, and then B, how do you use enforcement? Thanks.
Well, the mission of the OCC is to ensure a safe and sound banking system, and within that, we also worked that all Americans have access to financial services and products, and so our education program is really geared to those two markets. One, certainly the consumers, and we have a lot of consumer information, primarily visible to the public on our helpwithmybank.gov website. And in that, we provide more than 250 FAQs, frequently asked questions and answers on a variety of topics, mortgages, other kinds of credit, banking accounts, deposit insurance, identity theft. And we outline, just general, definitions, real basics of definitions, descriptions of products and services, where consumers could go if they have a problem, and we do link to our other sister agencies and other regulatory agencies. And we also have a mechanism for consumers to provide us with information and file complaints. We have an online process, and we also have a toll-free telephone line. We want to make it easy for consumers to reach us. I should say we spend a lot of time and resources reaching out to the public, really advertising these services. We have, and we do it in a variety of ways. I'm sort of making notes here. We have public service campaigns that we run each quarter on a variety of topics, and we reach both English and Spanish-speaking media through that. We have a partnership with Univision, again, where we push out some of these basic consumer messages. And then we engage in partnerships. Ken mentioned ASEC, and OCC is a member of ASEC. And we look for these partnerships to both exchange information, push out our resources, but also to gather in information. And there are a number of these partnerships. They're both, ASEC, Jumpstart. OCC is also a member of the Financial Literacy and Education Commission, so that's, again, an opportunity to exchange ideas and to work on more federal solutions to some of these issues. And then you had asked a question about what we do with this information, which I think is really important. We certainly bring it into our supervisory process, and we have examiners. We have roughly 1,700 institutions, and when the integration of the thrifts and OCC in July, we'll have probably 2,500 institutions. So we have examiners who really are in there looking at on a regular basis, looking at all of the consumer protection laws and whether or not our institutions are in compliance with those. However, through both our complaint process, our inquiry process, and how we track that, we have a database where we spent literally millions of dollars in this database where we track all of our complaints and all of our inquiries by topic, and we can, slice and dice that information, and we can aggregate it, and we look where there are, we certainly use that information to resolve individual complaints. I mean, that's really one of the primary purposes. But we also slice and dice that to see, are there a certain number of complaints of a particular type associated with a particular institution, and that really then impacts what we examine within the institution. And then we look at it across the board. Are there topics that are being that are impacting a number of institutions, and then what can we do on a policy level to address those. So I guess some of the things that I haven't heard, reaching minority markets, how, kind of your strategies, you need to think about some strategies for doing that. And I guess the other thing I haven't heard, but certainly something to think about, privacy issues and protecting information that consumers send to you. And just real quickly, along those lines, what we do is we require that these complaints be either written or come through our website, so that there is a signature, and then we can then refer that back to the bank to resolve.
I'm not sure who has a whistleblower program. You have, anybody else have a whistleblower program? Well, I'll have a whistleblower question for you then. Ted?
Thank you. If you don't know NEFI, which is commonly how the National Endowment is known, we're a nonprofit organization that's based in Colorado that's focused on improving the financial knowledge and capability of all Americans. There are four things we're best known for. First of all, we fund a lot of behavioral research at major universities and think tanks about why people do the things they do. Second, we provide programs in high schools and colleges. We reach about 600,000 high school students a year, and have been doing that for 25 years and are now engaged with about 560 colleges with financial capability educational programming. Third, we partner with about 100 organizations ranging from the Red Cross to Habitat for Humanity, bringing financial knowledge and content to their communities. And fourth, probably our biggest growth area is media. We do a great deal of outreach. At the moment, we're averaging about 280 media mentions or quotes a month, which is more than a triple of what it was, 3 times what it was 2 years ago. I want to go to the second part of your question, which is, what might I suggest that you might focus on? And that the wish list really has 2 things on it. One is research, and the second is partnerships. In thinking about today, I had a chance to talk to some of the researchers that we deal with and how you might be valuable, or where you might spend your time in its most valuable way. And there are some major gaps in research around the issues that you're wrestling with. One is understanding risk. If you look at a lot of the existing research, there is a very poor understanding in the investor community about how to assess risk. And if you look at the areas of the markets that you're responsible for, that's a very, very volatile area. So understanding risk, I think, is very important. Second, overconfidence. And regretfully, I have to admit this is a male tendency. There is a lot of research pointing that men are just terribly overconfident in their ability to deal with these issues. So additional research on overconfidence, I think, would be very valuable. And the third area has been talked about a little bit before, but it's around the whole question of fraud and what we consider to be one of the biggest coming risk areas in the next 10 years. If you look at the baby boomers, many of us are suddenly going to have access to a lot of cash. And that's the transition from when they are accumulating money to when they retire. So and this ties very much into the understanding risk and overconfidence question. The potential for abuse that's coming as people have large slugs of money, I think, is very, very high. And I think it's something that would be well worth your time to provide some funding for research on how to deal with this. So in the research category, risk, overconfidence, coming issues around large fraud questions with large amounts of money. The second thing is partnerships. If you look at the financial capability community, there's a great deal of very good content. And the weakness is in distribution. How do you get people to be interested in this information and incorporate it in their decision making? And that's a challenge we all really face. So as you look at the different communities that were outlined in some of the questions, if you look at the basic down to a farmer, there's a great network of organizations out there that you might want to partner with, ranging with the land-grant universities, cooperative extension, and then on through to the individual investor. You've got organizations like the SEC and FINRA who are years ahead of you in dealing with this whole distribution question. This is something that our community deals with a great deal and wrestles with, and we're trying to find different ways to get into social media and into messaging that's acceptable to people. So in the partnership area, it's really distribution and who you might work with that could bring great value to you as you're trying to figure out how to make meaningful messaging get to people that you care about. So those are the two things.
Ken, you mentioned that people were confident in their retirement, and which struck me as based on pre-2008 or post-2008, and had some understanding of this, and it brought me back to the AARP scenario when they're like fill in the box, and I remember going through some of my financial planning, computer screens, and it would say, what expected return are you going to get? 6, 8, or 12? It's kind of one of those things. Well, of course I want 12, so I'm going to click that box, and so here's your trajectory. Don't worry, you're going to be fine. I mean, how does Ted brought up a great point. How do we reconcile that? How do we recalibrate? This is not 2007 anymore. Although the way the market's been going, I don't know.
Well, the data we have is 2011. And the confidence factors that I quoted were from those who have gone through the exercise of trying to determine how much they need. When we look at individuals overall throughout the survey, we have found that over the past several years, confidence has been coming down. Now, one of the spins that we've been putting on this is what we found in the past is that people had high levels of confidence, but then we asked them, how much are you saving? And we found the levels of savings were very low. Some shocking figures of about 33% of workers age 55 and older had less than $25,000 in total savings. This would include what you have in a K plan, passport savings, any other holdings you may have outside of the value of your home or the value of a defined benefit plan. So the confidence factor comes in for those who have gone through the exercise, who have received some education. And we've actually found that those who have gone through this exercise, their confidence levels have held up fairly well during the most recent years of 07 through 2011.
Can I just add one thing on that? And I'm going to go to the other age spectrum. Some research we recently funded really on emerging young adults that was done by the University of Arizona that looked specifically at the effects of the recession. And one of the most telling factors that came out of that was a significant drop in self-confidence by young adults caused by the recession in their ability to manage money. And the most disturbing thing is there was a 22% drop specifically by young women in their confidence. So yes, as people are approaching retirement and are going through the exercise, that's a confidence builder if they do it. But at the other end of the age spectrum, the workforce age spectrum, we have a very significant confidence issue. And that's where education, additional research, I think would be very, very valuable. Because this is a group that's coming through that doesn't have traditional pensions. It doesn't have the three-legged stool that we all learned about years ago. It's a group that's really flying solo for the first time. So I think focusing some efforts there could be very beneficial down the road.
Thank you. Rob?
Yeah, Scott, the two questions you led off with a moment ago about how do we tear down silos, work together, and how do we really translate that to effective enforcement and leverage our enforcement capabilities are, in my opinion, exactly where you should be focused right now, and they're probably the two big challenges that we face on the task force. I think it might be a little helpful to back up and explain what the task force is a bit, because I think it's instructive, I think, to what the CFTC might be looking at in the years ahead. The task force was put together not to create some kind of super agency, but to bring together the subject matter experts that have been focused on fraud for years and years and years, and have worked together already for years. And so when you talk about consumer outreach and effective enforcement, there's a tendency, I think, to reinvent the wheel. We've already heard from several members here about the great resources that exist and have existed for quite a while. The challenge is how to draw from that membership and to have it affect enforcement at the end of the day. We are very aware on the task force that when you look at the financial crisis and the harm to victims, you're not going to prosecute your way out of that. Consumer outreach, deterrence, and prevention are obviously cornerstones to that effort. And so what our challenge is the breadth of the task force and what we're facing. And so the members here at the table, they may or may not know, the Federal Reserve Board, the FDIC, the CFTC, the OCC, they're all members of the task force. We have over 30 different agencies involved, states attorneys general, even at the DA level. It's both civil and criminal exposure. And so I think the two issues you need to focus on in that kind of an effort, just looking at outreach for now, and they're really two counterposed ideas. One is to make sure that you are specific enough and narrow enough in certain key areas that you want to make sure that you have penetration with the public and their perception and the warnings that you want. And the other is to back up and make sure that it's broad enough and accessible enough to the public that doesn't view information the same way that many of us do here in DC in terms of balkanized acronyms and agencies. When they try to access information, they don't view it that way. That's what we've found. And so on the first area, what we've done is set up very specific working groups that focus on the areas we want to focus on, not to the exclusion of others, but just under the concept that that which gets measured gets done. And so we've done that in certain key areas. At the same time, we've put together one standalone website. I work in the Department of Justice. The Attorney General chairs the task force, but it's really composed of its member agencies. And so we have a standalone website, stopfraud.gov. The title might suggest this is for the public to access. It is not jargony. It says, if you've been a victim of fraud, where you can report it. Do you want more information in financial literacy on how to prevent yourself from becoming a victim in the first place? And then it basically is just a redirection machine. We're not an agency. Everyone already has these resources. The public might not know how to access them best. Even some agencies do a very good job with this. The FTC and their Consumer Sentinel program, they're quickly linked through that. The preventloanscams.org link is on there, but it's just not presented that way to the public, so it's an easy way for them to access it. And then to leverage this into effective enforcement, we try to merge the two, both outreach and enforcement, in one. Just an example, it's analogous, is in the mortgage fraud area. Mortgage fraud is a challenge not so much because it's so complicated, but because there's so much of it. It's an atomistic fraud. There's plenty of mortgage fraud enforcement for everybody around the country, but they don't know where to train their resources. And the public's being victimized all the time with foreclosure scams and loan modification scams and the like. So public outreach is key to prevent those kinds of scams from taking place. And so we get out of DC, bring the different subject matter experts like FinCEN and HUD OIG and others out to different regions of the country that have been most affected by that targeted area that we're focused on. We hold a public summit in the morning where we bring in the regional folks to discuss the problems they're seeing there. We use the national resources that are available to respond and give them more information, tell them about the website and things like that. Then in the afternoon, we have a closed law enforcement only session where we talk with the regional enforcement folks about the tools that data that FinCEN and HUD have that can give target lists on who they really should be spending their time going after in that community. That's been effective. I think it was Karen that mentioned one of the key questions, and she's absolutely right. Outreach to minorities and to minority communities and even English second language communities is much more difficult. Websites aren't always the best way to do that. By going out and doing this in a regional way, it accomplishes a few things. One of them is to take some resources that don't always translate to the regional level out directly to the folks that it most impacts and the enforcement folks, but it also generates a lot of regional press. We work with the FTC and others to make sure that we get out a lot of radio awareness, which is a lot of times how they're made aware of it. When we were up in Detroit, we brought in individuals from several of the minority communities that are up there that are English second language, and where they mostly get their news from local newspapers that they use, and it was important to loop them in so that that ended up in the media that they consume. And so that's the broadening and then the tightening that we've found to be most useful, and it's diametrically opposed to the notion of having an inside the beltway effort that relies upon the media to pick up and translate it at the regional level. We've found that not to be as effective. And the other point I would just make is in terms of, you mentioned whistleblowers. I mean, I personally don't have whistleblower statutes in the department. Obviously, antitrust does. The SEC yourselves, many others use the whistleblowers. I think the challenge there, and we have a website that has an email address and all these routing functions to report fraud. The challenge there is, again, the same tightening and broadening. You need to get that message out broadly in order to get the folks reporting fraud when they find it. But then on the back end, having market intelligence and the ability to sift through and find those complaints that are worthy of action on the enforcement side is an enormous challenge. And that's something that I think that we've confronted too in terms of our agency and through our website.
Well, I think that's great advice, and I was struck when I arrived at the commission and seeing some of the enforcement and some of the fraud, and both of your points on focusing on minority communities and how pervasive fraud is. Very central. They pick on members of their own community, members of their own minority group, and it's not, just because of the same class or organization doesn't mean that there isn't fraud, and they actually take advantage of those personal relationships or hereditary relationships and just absolutely abuse it. It's just ridiculous, but we have to look at it. If I could
just add one thing to that, Ted mentioned he's absolutely right that when you talk about, just broadly speaking, investment fraud, you're looking increasingly at the growing number of retirees and their income. And we all know that that's often a ripe area for fraudsters through a variety of means. And it's in that area that you find the greatest penetration of what we call affinity frauds, what you're talking about, which is the building of a trust relationship so that you can strip them of their money, essentially, through whatever it is, Ponzi schemes, Forex fraud, whatever it is. And that a big part of affinity frauds is ethnic relations and those smaller communities. We find that time and again, particularly in the Ponzi areas. So it's right to make sure that the outreach involves some component that will penetrate those markets, because those are consumers of the information that really need to know it to prevent themselves from being victimized, but they're not always mainstream media that I think more traditionally the issuance of a press release we assume has a deterrent value. I don't think we should assume that in the box of retirement era and in certain communities within this country.
Great point. Craig?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate today. This is a privilege for the MetLife organization. As I mentioned, the broker-dealers that are part of MetLife, we are traditional retail insurance-based broker-dealers. We have 4 organizations, as I said earlier, 2 of which that are independent contractor representative, two of which that support the independent contractor model, and 2 of which that support the employee or captive model. We have over 10,000 representatives, registered representatives, that are part of our 4 broker-dealer complex, and our clients represent a large cross-section of America spanning all 50 states. And as an organization, we do not engage in retail futures or commodities business. However, we do offer a wide range of investment products, including stocks, bonds, ETFs, mutual funds, variable annuities, and variable life. We do have a small segment of our client base that does engage in cash options transactions, primarily from a hedging perspective. Over the course of the past few years, we've seen an evolution on the product side, particularly on the ETF front, that are based on derivative structures. And because of this evolution, the benefits of a consumer education and outreach program, I think, would be substantial at this point. But I would extend the education outreach not only to consumers, but also to financial professionals who have traditionally been focused on the security side of the house and may not be as familiar with some of the intricacies of the futures markets as have been kind of brought to light here over the last few years. A real-world example of this, to illustrate the point would be an advisor who sits down with a retiree and develops an asset allocation program, and they use an allocation of ETFs, many of which are based on the cash side, but some of which may be based on commodities. And there are nuances that are associated with those ETFs that are different from the cash side of the house. And I think that there has been maybe a lack of understanding of some of the structures that are embedded in these ETFs that are based on derivatives. And I think it would be a real benefit for not only the investing public but the professionals that serve the investing public to highlight these interdependencies that now exist in the financial markets, and that it's no longer just a cash-based market or a futures-based market, but that we really exist as one large global financial market. And I would amplify what was said earlier to consider leveraging some of the already built industry resources that have been out there. I'll highlight the Options Industry Institute, terrific material. So.
In the previous panel, we had kind of a commodity pool operator, John Grady. He suggested that the SEC, the CFTC, FINRA, and NFA sit down and really focus on the sales kit and improving kind of from a four-corner standpoint to make sure we don't have any gaps in the system and improving the disclosures that go out to customers. What do you think of that?
I think the opportunity to improve disclosure would help tremendously. But I would just reinforce that by saying take something that's extraordinarily complex and distill it down into something that's digestible for the retail investor. I mean, these are very, very complex structures, and sometimes it's difficult to explain the risks or the nuances that are associated with these products. But I think that the real key to success is taking something that's complex and making it as simple and as digestible as possible.
Is that a better job? Would our resources be better spent at the federal agencies, both the CFTC and the SEC, focusing on kind of broader consumer issues, and let FINRA and NFA focus on really hammering out improved disclosures on product levels and working with sales forces and working at that level to improve the disclosure and understanding what the risk is? I mean, I think a lot of these ETFs are billed as an exposure tool, and when you actually look at their performance, they hardly resemble what the actual exposure is.
Exactly. You know, I think it's surround sound. I think to the extent that message can come out of many different fronts, I think that would be helpful not only at the consumer level and the investor level, but also at the professional level. To have that tone set by the CFTC, the SEC, FINRA, the NFA, I think would be really beneficial.
I have a concern with some of these managed futures and mutual funds versus kind of our commodity pools. I think some mutual funds are using subsidiaries to now market, hey, we're a fund. That falls in between kind of our regulatory space here. And, you know, they're clearly mutual fund regulated by the SEC offering futures products.
Right.
How big a problem is that? I assume it's a growing problem, and we need to be firm about that to clarify where those lines are.
I think to provide clarity to the industry would be beneficial. You're right. There are products that straddle both sides of the regulatory fence, whether it be the CFTC or the SEC, and I think to provide a clear line of delineation would be very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Tanya?
On behalf of Chairman Debbie Matz of the NCUA Board and the Consumer Protection Director, my supervisor, Kent Buckham, I want to thank you for giving NCUA a seat at the table to share with you some of our experiences over the last few years and to give you a little insight on what we've been doing with the hopes that it'll help the CFTC as you go forward. About 4 years ago, for similar congressional reasons, but slightly different than what you're dealing with now, NCUA began exploring the need for additional outreach from this agency. And we began to ask ourselves very similar questions to the ones you presented to us today. Historically, NCUA was more focused on the safety and soundness of credit unions as financial institutions and ensuring that the risks that credit unions take on in lending and providing deposit products to their members didn't create a risk to the National Credit Union Share Insurance Fund. Then came the economic downturn and Dodd-Frank, and it caused us to hasten our efforts in this area. And in January of 2010, the NCUA board created the Office of Consumer Protection. The office has a primary purpose of developing consumer compliance and consumer protection policy for the agency, as well as supervising and enforcing those policies within the credit union industry. The office is divided into two divisions. The one division, the Division of Consumer Access, focuses more on the chartering side of the NCUA business, in the sense of the Consumer Access Division makes sure we provide information to consumers so that they know, one, how to charter a credit union, what the benefits are of chartering a credit union, and how to operate them. And that division also focuses on things like the low-income credit union designation, which we give to credit unions that will allow them access to privileges and benefits that your normal credit union wouldn't have. It also focuses on bylaw issues that affect credit union membership. The division for which I'm responsible for, Consumer Compliance and Outreach, focuses on consumer complaints, fair lending examinations at credit unions, so it's a part of our supervision responsibilities. And then we also have a large responsibility as it relates to financial literacy, education, and outreach. Prior to the creation of the Office of Consumer Protection, financial literacy, education, and outreach was somewhat of an additional duty for our regional offices. And because of the focus on safety and soundness, financial literacy and education often was pushed to the back burner, and there was not a lot of focus put on it. The NCUA board realized that consumer protection had to be elevated to the same level of priority as safety and soundness. And so it created this office to focus on that and to allow the regional offices to focus strictly on safety and soundness and protecting the Share Insurance Fund. In the office, what we have done is we've done a lot of research. We've always been a partner or a member of the Federal Financial Literacy and Education Commission, but we did not have a large voice there. We've increased our presence there, and we began to talk more to our sister regulators to find out what they've been doing for years in an effort to concentrate our efforts, centralize our efforts, and make them more robust than what they have been in the past. So we're partnering with other federal agencies, and you'll hear a lot of what you already heard before from us. We're working to leverage the resources and the experiences of not just regulators, but also nonprofit organizations to help us with building our efforts and strengthening our outreach. We've also developed a website that is focused specifically on consumers. We've always had ncua.gov, and we recognize the primary focus there was to provide information to the regulated entity, and it was not necessarily in a language that the consumer could understand. So in March of this year, we launched mycreditunion.gov, and it solely focuses on consumers, not just the credit union member, but your general public who may not have access to or be a member of a credit union, to help them understand what credit unions are and to also provide additional information about what we're doing in the financial world, what it is to get a loan, what does it mean to have a credit score, and how do you find out about that credit score. We provide information about share insurance and what that means. What does it mean that my money is covered up to $250,000 with the full faith and credit of the United States government? We recognize not many people really understood that, so we wanted to provide additional information in that vein. We also link to a lot of other government agencies and nonprofit organizations from our site, and we do it in both ways. It's embedded in the information that we provide, and we also provide a separate links pages so that if someone's doing research and they stop by our page, they can jump to someone else's page and get information. A lot of the links on the site go directly to mymoney.gov, which was a collaboration of the Treasury and other financial regulators, and it has a lot of good information there. We didn't want to reinvent or recreate the wheels because they were there and they were already working successfully. We also have revamped our consumer complaint process. All consumer complaints now come through my division. And we revamped them in that while we still refer the complaints to a credit union for research and to provide a response, instead of responding back to the credit union's member, we require the credit union to respond to the regulator, to us. And then we, in turn, respond to the credit union member. We do that for a couple of reasons. One, it helps us with our supervision function because it allows us to take a stern look at each complaint to determine whether there is a violation that has taken place that needs to be corrected on an individual basis. Secondly, it allows us to educate the individual member about his or her specific situation because it's hard in a general sense to provide information in a pamphlet, on a website, or even at a seminar that deals with an individual's specific circumstance. But when someone writes to the government, per se, about their particular concern, that gives us the opportunity to answer that concern and then educate the person a little bit more on what they need to know, whether it be about the law, the regulation, or even the practice and policies in the industry. We've also used or strengthened our member complaint process so that we can track them better. We've created a humongous database, not just to track the written complaints that come in, but we're also tracking the phone calls that we get in which we give general information. That does a couple of things for us as well. It shows us the trends in what credit unions are doing and what consumers are really concerned about. And we can tie them to market events. Recently, when the Fed changed the rules on overdraft protection, we noticed an uptick in the phone calls and the complaints about the overdraft products at credit unions. So that alerted us that we needed to do more education with the credit unions themselves and more education with the consumers about what those new regulations actually meant and how we would enforce them. The robust consumer complaint tracking process also gives us indicators and caution flags to what's going on outside of the Beltway. One of the first triggers we got regarding what was happening with mortgages was through our complaint process. When consumers start having problems with their money, they are the first to sound the alarm and to tell you something's happening out here to me. And if you get enough of those something's happening to me, then you recognize that this region of the country is starting to have a problem and it may spread elsewhere. Or you recognize that the country as a whole is having a problem that Washington may not yet be aware of. And so by trending and watching the patterns, we can focus our attentions and energies on issues that are coming forward, and it alerts us to changes we need to make in our rulemaking process and in our regulations.
Can I? How large is your organ? Well, you have the larger division or the larger office, but yes. 2 divisions. How large is the office? Well, no. How large is the consumer division? I'm sorry.
The consumer division itself, right now, believe it or not, I have, including myself, 15 employees, and so technology is our best friend and sometimes our worst enemy. The agency as a whole is very small. We only have 1,100 employees nationwide.
You're only twice as big as us.
So the other thing we've done to help us out, because we don't have a lot of resources, is we've partnered and we've hired consultants and contractors. That helps us to leverage the resources we do have. And the other thing we found is they sometimes have a better finger on the pulse outside of the Beltway than we do. It was very instrumental with building the website that we hire a contractor because the contractor was able to say, this is what you need to say on an 8th grade level so that the world understands it. Someone mentioned earlier that Washington, we use a lot of acronyms and abbreviations. Well, you go out to Iowa, they don't know what the CFTC is. Believe it or not, if you go down to Southern Virginia, they have no clue what NCUA is. So hiring contractors has helped us to really break down Washington speak into plain English so that the general consumer can benefit from what we have to offer. And so contractors, vendors, and consultants have become very vital and important to what we do.
Can you briefly describe your whistleblower
Yes.
program? Okay.
Under the Federal Credit Union Act, credit union employees get whistleblower protection when they share information with us about wrongdoing at the credit unions themselves. A lot of those reports come through my office, and we refer them out to our regional officers who have the primary responsibility for supervision and oversight. When a regional director gets a complaint from us about, from a whistleblower about wrongdoing or breaking the law and regulations at a credit union, the regional director can then send in an examiner to do further investigations to determine if in fact there is some violation ongoing that we need to correct. Sometimes there is, and it leads to enforcement actions. And we have a long list of authority under the Federal Credit Union Act of what we can do as it relates to enforcement actions. But we're now discovering that lots of times there is no law being broken. There's just a problem with transparency in the management within the credit union. So that then gives us another opportunity to educate credit union officials about how they should manage and operate their institutions.
Can I ask how you've organized your whistleblower program? Is it in your office, and does that report directly to your top leadership, or does it go through is it part of the enforcement office?
The whistleblower protection program is a part of each regional office. We have 5 regions and 5 regional directors who are responsible for different areas of the country. As far as enforcement actions are concerned, if it's not related directly to a consumer protection matter, the regional directors handle those enforcement actions with the support of the Office of General Counsel. And then they report directly to the board regarding those issues.
Rob, if I can ask, when you look at all the different offices and agencies you work with in the variety of whistleblower programs, are they commonly organized within enforcement, or do you have a sense of that, how they're organized, or do you have a preference on how they're organized?
I wouldn't voice my preference over all the different members of the task force. I can probably speak a little bit intelligently, for example, with antitrust division in the department. You know, they have a program. It's organized, as I understand it, in the enforcement realm. Most of the whistleblower programs I know of are organized in an enforcement realm because of, that is in fact the key point in having the program in the first place. And, I think from what I understand, the SEC, yourselves and others who have whistleblower programs, you're gonna face those 2 challenges I was mentioning before about making sure that the message goes out so that you get the people reporting the information that you need, but then on the back end, and sort of counterintuitively, if you're successful in that, sifting the information that you receive in an intelligent way so you can actually do something about it. And I think people underestimate that back end problem with whistleblowers. On our website, we have our own email that they can send to the task force. We get a tremendous amount of email traffic, and we're not an agency. It's not a whistleblower program. We basically farm it out to the different members. That's an enormous challenge in and of itself. And so having some type of intelligence on the back end to sift those good leads, it's almost like what we do. I'm a federal prosecutor. It's what we do with suspicious activity reports. Millions are generated. And that's a great tool, but only if you have the capability to use it. And so I think housing it within the enforcement side places the correct emphasis on why do we have it in the first place, and are we going to be effective in translating it to enforcement from those whistleblower portions that are worth following up on.
We're running close on time. Tanya, if you want to wrap it up, we're into our break time already, and I don't want to impose on everybody else's time too much longer. But
actually, I'm finished.
You're finished? All right.
Great. Well, I again want to say thank you for having me here this morning. And I need to use the Lori Schock disclosure and say that I'm here on my own behalf, not on representing the Federal Reserve Board, the Federal Reserve Banks, or staff. And I also want to acknowledge the leadership that CFTC has provided to the Financial Literacy and Education Commission. There are a couple of us in the room who have been around since the beginning of FLEC and who remember the leadership that the Commission provided to develop the mymoney.gov website. So I just want that on the table that, you guys have been in this business a little bit. You just need to get more engaged. The Federal Reserve does focus in our division a lot on low to moderate income audiences and underserved audiences, and those often include minority audiences and people for whom English is a second language. So I just want to, sort of say a me too there for those people who have raised that. Unlike Ted, I don't have 2 things, I have 4 things for you. And it's, most of these at this point in the morning have been said before, but I'll just say them again. Number 1, know your customer. I think it's very, very important for you to go out there and listen to the real voices of real people. The idea of consumer testing your disclosures is really important. I really like the idea of audience segmentation. The fact that Ken mentioned, you have sort of a consumer out there, but you also have the people that you're dealing with that deliver product and services. And that leads me to my second point, which is you need to work both wholesale and retail. Tanya's exactly right. The people in Southern Virginia don't know the CFTC. They don't know the Federal Reserve. So although a lot of our materials that we produce are written at that 8th grade level for the end user, people aren't coming to the Federal Reserve. I wish we had a sexy website. We don't. We make everybody go to federalreserve.gov, and once they hit that homepage, if they can find the consumer information link, they're lucky. But so we work a lot with that wholesale channel to deliver materials, to work with the partnerships that we have. We also provide layers of material. A lot of times people want to deliver everything. You need to know everything. It's that, you got to have it all. You need to know every little detail there is about this particular financial product. And I liken that to drinking out of a fire hose. And we need to also make sure that we provide garden hoses for people so that they can get the 5 tips, the 5 key things you need to know, the key facts, whatever document you want to call it, with links to the further layers below. So kind of thinking about working that wholesale retail piece. My point number 3 is very closely related to point number 2, which is collaborate, cooperate, and partner. And you've heard that a lot this morning. I would encourage you to work with trusted third parties and networks. Unlike the SEC, the board does not link to trade associations and other entities on its website. If you're not a .gov, we're not linking to you, except if you're a reserve bank and those are .orgs, and we'll link to our reserve banks. But we do partner with our colleagues over at USDA through the Cooperative Extension System. We partner with local government agencies and the CAPS. So any other kinds of ways that you can partner and collaborate. Karen mentioned Financial Literacy Month, National Consumer Protection Week. There's lots of good weeks and months out there for you to find partnerships and collaborate with. Point number 4 is closely aligned to one of Ted's, and that is to dive into your data. Mine your complaint data. Like our other sister agencies, we too have a complaint database, and we are using business intelligence tools and text mining tools to kind of understand the themes that are emerging from those complaints. To use your examination or other supervisory function that you have to collect data and provide feedback into your consumer programs to identify those emerging risks.
Can I ask, how do you do that electronically to really leverage the rest of your organization to mine that?
Right. We do have examination reports that come up into the board from the reserve banks. So we're very fortunate structurally that we have a network out there that feeds into us. Tanya has 5 regions, we have 12, but we actually have, in addition to the 12 reserve banks, we have 24 branches. And so all of those 36 entities are feeding information into us. And then our review examiners partner very closely with the consumer education people and the complaints people to sort of all share that information. And so that gets at breaking down some of those silos that you were talking about earlier. I think that the real importance of the examination supervisory function is that they can really be the canaries in the coal mine. They can alert you to those emerging risks and trends that you might not really understand. And there's another role for research here, and that is understanding what I will lovingly refer to as the multiplier effect. We actually did a research project that said, so when the Fed gets a complaint, how many problems are out there? In other words, we're seeing the tip of the iceberg. How big is the iceberg? And we actually worked with a research firm to collect data to help us sort of calculate out that multiplier. So, because, you know, people with a problem, not everybody complains. And if they complain, there is in the literature private complaining and public complaining. So I can grouse to my husband, or I can actually contact the bank or the Attorney General or the state Department of Banking or the state financial institutions regulator. It takes a lot for consumers to reach the federal government. And so one of the things that we were able to do was calculate out this multiplier effect. I can tell you what it is for credit cards. I couldn't begin to tell you what it would be for futures and other commodities. So those are my 5 messages. Know your customer, work wholesale and retail, collaborate, cooperate and partner, and dive into your data.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Luke? Thank you again for the opportunity to present. We conducted a survey that found 1 in 4 people in the U.S. are either unbanked or underbanked. Unbanked people do not use mainstream banks for deposit services. Underbanked people have a deposit account but still routinely go to alternative financial service providers for basic transactional or credit needs. The underbanked problem is a concern for both consumers and institutions. It's a loss of market opportunity for institutions, and the consumers are not able to save or take advantage of consumer protections. We're addressing this problem on both the wholesale side and retail side. Wholesale, we have a Money Smart program, a Money Smart financial education program, which was released in 2001. That's available in 9 languages, in podcast format, self-paced instruction format, and instructor-led format. A challenge we have, our then chairman's initial goal was to maximize the number of people taught with Money Smart. So our focus was on distribution, training banks, training nonprofits to use the curriculum. We weren't really able to focus on ensuring that those people who were teaching the curriculum were qualified to do so. And that's certainly not an easy challenge. And so on the retail side, directly to consumers, we have used complaint data, consumer inquiry data to fine-tune our messaging and start consumer campaigns. For example, after the financial crisis, we received a huge spike in deposit insurance inquiries, people asking, is my money insured? What are deposit insurance rules? So we created a public awareness campaign, created a new website, myfdicinsurance.gov, redesigned our electronic deposit insurance estimator tool, created English and Spanish language PSAs and other resources to help people understand deposit insurance and help regain confidence in the banking system. As a result of changes in overdraft, we've also received inquiries, complaints, or we have internal concerns about. We did a survey that found that a small percentage of the population are responsible for a large share of overdrafts. So we created a little initiative around overdrafts, overdraft brochure, for example, and added information to our Money Smart program on overdrafts and how to avoid, how to manage an account properly. So we work primarily, our primary model really is wholesale based upon the limited number of staff we have. We have sent financial institution letters to our institutions, making them aware of the resources we provide, highlighting positive regulatory consideration for them under the Community Reinvestment Act, which means basically that during a CRA exam, a bank's financial education activities can receive the bank positive consideration under at least 2 different tests depending upon the bank's size, and pointing out opportunities, partnerships. Most recently, after we signed a partnership agreement with Department of Education, and NCUA, we sent a letter to banks specifically highlighting school-based savings programs as a market opportunity. I think many of our other lessons learned have already been covered and have already been addressed, but I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you. I don't know if any of the panelists want to ask one another any thoughts or concerns that you've heard here today. Laura, do you have anything? Well, we've pushed the limit on time, so we're gonna go to a little break right now. Let's be back here at 11:45, if you don't mind, and we'll do the final panelist. Thank you very much for this panel's participation and great advice. I greatly appreciate your participation. Thanks. Okay. We have our third and final panel. In the interest of time, I'm going to have you make a brief introduction of who you are and then go right into your spiel as opposed to going around twice. So you can tell more about who you are, or you can tell more about your message. It doesn't matter. We just got to get it done.
Well, thank
John,
you,
you're
Commissioner. And I will tell you more about what we do than who we are. But my name's John Gannon. I'm Senior Vice President for the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, as well as President of the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. And I want to talk about basically 3 things, because one of the things that you brought up is how does investor education integrate into the overall FINRA regulatory program? We have an Office of Whistleblower Enforcement, emerging regulatory issues, and we coordinate with all those organizations to make sure that we're using every regulatory weapon in our arsenal to address a problem. And to give you an example, Through our emerging regulatory issues group, we bring together virtually every department and office within FINRA to make sure that we're identifying different ways to address issues. And that includes through investor education, because as you probably know, Commissioner, to conduct an investigation and bring an enforcement action can take months, if not years in some cases. That means investors potentially can be harmed while that investigation and enforcement goes on. So that's where investor education can often step in, identify an issue early on and warn investors about it, whether it's now fraud or a sales practice abuse. And I think that's very, important. And I mean, one growing area for FINRA is the number of complex investment products that are out there. We've written a number of investor alerts with NASA, the SEC in recent years about complex products. And I think this is a very timely issue for the CFTC with the growth of commodity ETFs. Anyone who was reading the Wall Street Journal yesterday would notice that for the first time, the iShares Silver ETF actually had more volume than the probably most widely traded ETF in the United States, which is the S&P 500 SPDR. So it's an issue. So that we work very closely with our Office of Whistleblower, who's responsible for taking all our complaints, tips, and dealing with our examination and farming them out. But they also farm out issues to us that we can work on and get investor information out as quickly as possible. And we do that through investor alerts, pushing those out, but we also use advertising sometimes. For example, in one case we put out an alert last year on high-yield investment products. These are typically total frauds. We actually use Google AdWords to get people to come to the investor alert because that was a fraud that took place on the internet. So that's something that is a way to get people to come to your information. Not everyone's going to come to where you are. But we really, I think, have a strong ability to coordinate within FINRA and come up with a number of different regulatory methods of addressing an issue, whether it's investor education, education of our industry, our members, financial professionals, enforcement, examinations, or regulation. And we look at all of those before deciding what's the best method of addressing an issue.
What is the size of the FINRA consumer outreach budget and staff?
Sure. Well, let me answer that in two ways. There's FINRA Investor Education, which sort of more focuses on the regulatory issues, which I just mentioned. Mm-hmm. But there's also the FINRA Foundation. Between those two groups, we have 14 staff. The FINRA Investor Education Foundation has a project budget, which is not including staffing costs, of approximately $13 million a year. So that's all programmatic. It's dedicated to our programs, one of which I'll mention in a minute, but we have directed programs as well as we make grants to nonprofits and public universities and colleges. And that leads me to a point that Ted Beck raised. I mean, I think one area that the CFTC could focus on is research, but specifically, I would say financial fraud research. This is really an area where we're one of the few funders at this point in financial fraud research. And when I talk about financial fraud research, I want to talk about it in two aspects. One is forensics, identifying fraud, and two, prevention. And to give you two examples of grants that we funded in that area, we funded a grant to NC State, which was looking at how you can use non-financial information in filings with the SEC to identify financial fraud. So to give you an example, if you have a company that's in the retail market, well, if their revenue is going up, but they're closing stores, what does that mean? That could be a red flag for financial fraud. So the researchers that we identified were able to develop an algorithm that was able to look at non-financial information to identify financial fraud. They've now worked with the PCAOB, the SEC, to start beta testing that program, which is a computer software thing that will allow people to plug into a SEC Form 10K or 10Q and identify red flags for financial fraud. So that's sort of on the forensic side of the research that we're conducting. On the prevention side, what we do is we have looked at who is the target for investment fraud. And what we found was sort of counterintuitive. The typical victim for investment fraud is somebody who's male, age 55 to 65 years of age, financially literate, which surprises many people. They have some weaknesses, as I think Ted mentioned. They're overly confident or overly optimistic. They're also very self-directed, which means they don't seek a second opinion from a financial professional, lawyer, or accountant. They've also had a recent financial or health problem in their family. We've also looked at what are the tactics that underlie investment fraud and actually have identified common tactics that can be used against people. We did research of looking at over 300 undercover tapes of fraudsters pitching undercover agents and identified and cataloged the different types of tactics that were used. And I'll talk in a minute about what we did with that research. The other thing that we've done in the research area is we have created a financial fraud research center at Stanford. What we are trying to do is bring together academics who are doing some research in the financial fraud area with regulators and policymakers to ensure that policymakers are aware of the work that's being done both on the forensic side of financial fraud, but also on the prevention side, because we really think there hasn't been an adequate dialogue between those two groups. And so we will be launching our Financial Fraud Research Center at Stanford later this year, which will include a website that will collect much of the financial fraud research is out there, give short, abbreviated versions of it for people who do not have time to read 50 to 100-page academic articles, which most of us don't, as well as bring people together through symposia to start talking about what are some of these issues that really need more research, and how can we better coordinate between regulators and academics to identify ways to solve some of these fraud issues. The last thing I want to talk about is what I think is the primary strength of the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, which is marketing and distribution. That, I think, is one of the things that we have found that's been missing from much of the investor education and financial education efforts that have been made throughout the United States. Everyone around this room has terrific materials and content. The real challenge is how do you get it into the hands of people that really need it? How do you get it to the target audiences that truly need that information? And we've done that in a couple of ways. One, we've actually had symposia at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth, where we've brought nonprofits and regulators together to help them teach them social marketing techniques and skills. How do you develop social marketing programs? What we found in our grant program is people wanted to build things, but they had no idea how to get them out to the people they want. So what we've been trying to do is build capacity within, government regulators as well as the nonprofit world to develop better marketing and distribution resources for financial education. The other thing that we focused on is doing that on our own. And one program that I just want to highlight for you is our investor fraud program. Lori Schock mentioned that earlier today. This is a program which we call Outsmarting Investment Fraud. It's our largest and I would argue our most successful program. And the reason I think it's successful is a number of reasons. One, it's research-based. As I mentioned, we did research into these tactics that fraudsters use. We identified who the target of investment fraud is. We took that research to develop our program. And so we target older people, and we teach them the persuasion tactics that fraudsters use. So it's basically an evergreen program that doesn't focus on what the fraud du jour is. As we know, when oil and gas prices go up, we tend to see oil and gas fraud. But it doesn't focus on that. It focuses on the underlying fraud techniques. And what we did is we actually went out in the field and tested this program in 2008 and 2009, taking two groups through it. One group went through the program, and in between the two groups going through the program, we had a telemarketer pitch people on a fake oil and gas investment scam. And what we were able to determine is that we could show a 50% reduction in susceptibility to the fraud pitch between the group who had already been through the program and the group who had yet to be through the program. So, that's what we did. But then is how do you get that program out there? How do you market it? And that's where partnering comes in. And, we have partnered both at the national level with NASA, Bob Webster, with the SEC, with AARP, but also at the grassroots level with local law enforcement officials to deliver this program because we know it works. We make this available to anyone who wants to deliver it. We're now working with Better Investing, which is an investment clubs group, to train them to deliver the program because that's important is how do you get it out there? I don't have enough staff to get it out as much as we want. The other thing that we did, which I think is a unique angle to take, is we actually produced a documentary based on our proven program. And we developed that and filmed that documentary. And not only did we distribute it for free on DVDs, but we were able to have WQED in Pittsburgh sponsored on public television. So right now, that program is showing on public television stations around the United States. 45 million households have seen our documentary on outsmarting investment fraud.
Is that what it's called?
Yes. So, I mean, you know, it's using techniques like that. I mean, identifying who your audience is, making sure you do the market research to feel how they do it. And we did not only research around the program, but research around how we advertise. One of the things I think is important is we want to create a social norm of good behavior. Oftentimes we scare people or frighten them. I think what we need to focus on is advertising that engages people in doing the right behavior, not the wrong behavior.
Great. Thank you. Laura?
Great. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm Laura Heavey. I'm a Senior Manager of Communications for the American Institute of CPAs and manage the CPA profession's financial literacy effort. The umbrella program is 360 degrees of financial literacy, which includes the Feed the Pig campaign, which is our PSA campaign with the Ad Council, Feed the Pig for Tweens, and among others, the Workplace Leaders in Financial Education Awards, which we recently launched in partnership with the Society for Human Resource Management. 360 degrees of financial literacy takes a life stage approach to financial education because what you need to know about managing your finances changes and evolves as you go through life. It also allows CPAs to take a leadership role in their community and also volunteer where their passion lies and also given the needs of their community. So, for example, a CPA may start a workplace financial education program, go into their child's school and teach a program, but really allows for their to volunteer where the need is. It's also free of marketing and advertising. Any programs associated with the 360 program are offered for free to the public or provide unbiased information. There's no advertising. Any CPAs that are involved with the program, it's purely pro bono. They're not there to market their services. 360 launched 7 years ago, and a lot has changed since then, not just in light of the economic crisis, but particularly in the way individuals consume information. So as a communications professional, that's really the recommendations I make today come from my experience with managing the program for 6 years, and in the light really when we launched Feed the Pig in 2006, MySpace was the big place to be, for example, and really now it's Facebook, and that's just a minor example, but there's so much more information coming to consumers. How do you break through that and get your message heard? So, of course, I'm saying much of what has already been said today, but I think really it's important first to start with the target audience. I'm sure there's multiple audiences that you could be reaching, but when first starting a program, I think it's important to almost take baby steps. Choose a target audience and use them almost as a beta group and allow them to be your beta group and hone and test your message. What marketing messages and communications are really going to be most successful with that group, and then build upon those successes. As I think everyone has said, certainly leverage relationships and partnerships to expand your reach. I mean, not just within this room, there's many opportunities for that, but also greater audiences and to get the message out there. Our partnership with the Society for Human Resource Management has really allowed us to do this. We are honoring employers with workplace financial education programs and also encouraging employers who don't have programs to start them. And so with CPAs and HR professionals in every workplace, it's really a unique opportunity for the greatest reach. And then finally, don't just choose one delivery channel. I think there's a lot of opportunity. John spoke of this, many others spoke about this, and I just mentioned it with partnerships to get the reach out. But one of the things that I have found, having built many websites and posting different things online, is if you build it or post it, doesn't mean they will come. And so with so much information bombarding consumers, even in just in financial education, investor education, it's important to reinforce and use different channels. So whether it be something, so like social media or more traditional like a print newsletter or a brochure, to reinforce the message, to repeat, because eventually they will hear. And so just because you post it doesn't mean they'll come, as I said, but really market those efforts through a variety of communications channels.
Thanks.
Colleen?
Good morning. I'm Colleen Tressler. I work in the Federal Trade Commission's Division of Consumer and Business Education. We have a staff of about 20. Many of you know that the FTC is a small agency. We work for the consumer to prevent fraud, deception, and unfair business practices in most areas of the economy. I work in the Bureau of Consumer Protection. That's where the Division of Consumer and Business Education is located. One thing that I'd like to say, I don't think I heard it earlier this morning, is when we do our consumer education, whenever there is a law enforcement announcement, we have a consumer education component to go out with it. With the press release, when there's a law enforcement press event, we try to get a victim. That makes it real. The press really likes that. They're more likely to pick it up, and the messages get out through different news organizations, and people see that in their local and national newspapers. We cover a lot of issues, most things in the economy, everything from credit and debt, advertising, privacy, online security, recognizing and reporting frauds and ripoffs, and identity theft and recovery. To give you an idea of our reach, in 2010, we distributed more than 17 million English and Spanish publications. In addition to that, we had more than 26 million web accesses to that information online. And that's just the consumer and business information at the FTC. I'd like to reiterate some of the other things I've heard this morning. We have a wholesale retail approach. We produce things with a staff the size of 20. We really can't get out into the field, but we have customers, whether they be law enforcement, consumer credit counseling services around the country, housing counselors, attorneys general, local consumer protection offices. They order our materials and then send them out through their organizations when they do, town hall meetings, state, county fairs, you name it. The other thing about that is it saves them money, and that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They don't have to worry about staff time and creating materials. And it helps reinforce that consistent messaging. And that brings me to another point. Everything that we do can be replicated by any other organization, government agency, nonprofit, private sector. And we will provide the InDesign files for anything that any organization wants in English and Spanish. And there again, it provides the consistent messaging. Similar to advertising, people have to hear the message repeatedly, so we kind of feel the same way about our consumer education messages. In fact, we have a saying at the agency is that education is the first line of defense against fraud and deception in the marketplace. So we feel like law enforcement goes hand in hand with the education component. A couple of our, complaint-oriented avenues are we do have complaints taken online at ftc.gov complaint assistant. We also take them at our toll-free telephone number, which is 877-FTC-HELP, so it's easily recognizable and remembered. And we do have a Consumer Sentinel program that I think Rob mentioned earlier, which law enforcement has access to. A lot of different organizations dump their complaints into that database, and then subscribers, these law enforcement agencies, which are international, can access that information and use it for targeting. So when somebody asks, how do you look for law enforcement cases, that's one way. We look at the database and see what we're hearing from consumers and where we're hearing it. And then staff is assigned to do investigations, cases, et cetera. We also have the teachable moment is whenever we can. We have a redress program. When we can get money back for the consumer, we communicate with them through postage mail. We also include a consumer education component when they get their what we call their redress check. So that really helps. We have a strong relationship with our Office of Public Affairs. We like to say that they do the news of the day. The Division of Consumer and Business Education develops the news you can use. So we work hand in hand with them. Recently, we've gotten heavily involved in social networking. We are on Facebook, Twitter. We do a lot of video work. We have a blog, and we have guest writers. So we would encourage you, if you wanted to write a blog, if that's a way for people who know to come to the FTC for practical, objective information, but they're not familiar with the CFTC, for example, that's one way for you to help get your message out there. So I think I'll let the next person speak. That's it for me.
Thank you. Karen?
Thank you. I'm Karen Wirtz with the National Futures Association, and thank you, Commissioner and Laura. I think, Commissioner, you mentioned this would be a learning opportunity for the CFTC. It's really been, for me, a learning opportunity as well. I think I've learned a few things that I didn't know coming into these, so I think these types of forums are very, very helpful to all of us. I'm just going to quickly mention, in respect of the time, some of the things that may not have been mentioned. Technology, we all have very good content, and we all use all the distribution channels that are available to us. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned is just search engine optimization. That's one of the areas that we try and focus on. And again, you know, we have to work within our budgets, but that's always the one thing that really bothers me, is that when I go to a Google search or a search engine and I put in, you know, futures, and, you know, NFA is not at and the CFTC is not at the top of the list. That's really where I would like people that are doing searches to go to first, and how we can achieve that. I think that's just always a challenge for us. So that's just one thing that I want you to think about. The other thing within technology is just the website metrics and how you can use your website in addition to just putting out information, but to use the metrics that are behind that, and FAQs. One of the things, you know, everyone uses FAQs, but what we also look into is what questions are people putting in that they're not finding answers to, and how can you improve your website in that way. And then you had mentioned just, you know, do you leverage within the organization? And I think that's really critical. All departments of NFA have to be part of the consumer education mission and feed information to both our enforcement, and as well as we get information in the consumer education area from the enforcement area. We talked a lot about, one of the last thing I'd like to talk about, one of the last things is we talk a lot about product education. What we didn't talk about a lot is just firm and salespeople type education. We really want investors to know, you know, what the product is that they're investing in, what are the fees, what are the risks. We also want them to know who are they dealing with. You know, do the due diligence, make sure you know who the firm is, make sure that they're registered, make sure that they're regulated. And, you know, one of a great example of some leverage opportunities is several years ago, the CFTC, NFA, and the exchanges developed the BASIC database that's used, that will provide individuals, if they want to do background checks, first if they want to find out if someone's registered, they can check and find out if someone's registered. In addition, they can do a background on their employment history. Has someone been at a firm for a long period of time? Has this person moved around? They can find out a disciplinary background, and that's been a very effective tool, and it gets, you know, lots and lots of searches on that. What an interesting development, and again, something that we haven't talked about too much, is just kind of the global. We talk a lot about here in the U.S., but one of the interesting developments with BASIC is some of the international regulatory bodies have just approached us and asked if they can start putting their disciplinary actions into the database. So there's ways to continue to make this much more robust, and those are the things that we're focusing on. And lastly is just effectiveness. I think that's the challenge, and I don't know if anyone's got a good measure of how to measure the effectiveness of your programs. You know, one of the ways that we measure effectiveness is whether customer complaints are going up or are they going down. And over the history, you know, with futures volume going up, customer complaints have trended down, and then we had this small problem called Forex, and all of a sudden customer complaints started going up again, and with the resources of the CFTC and NFA, those complaints have been going down. But it's really hard to measure the effectiveness, because you can say you get so many hits, but Are they going to your website in the right places, in your online learning? Do they just go to the first page and then they stop? So one of the things that I would have you focus on is just these website metrics as well, to make sure that you can measure the effectiveness. And my thought is try everything. Some things work and some things don't. And you just have to be willing to try new things.
Thank you, Karen. Gina?
Next, Gina McFadden again with the Options Industry Council, which is comprised of the options exchanges and OCC, the Options Clearing Corporation. We provide information on options for free to retail investors, financial advisors, and institutional investors. And I'm just going to jump down to how to get the information out, because again, you can have the best education in the world, but if people don't know about it, it provides you with nothing. So the suggestion is to use as many distribution channels as you can based on your budget. We have an annual budget of $7.5 million, and that again is funded by the options exchanges and OCC. And that covers some staffers, our field representatives, it doesn't cover our investor services call center or the management team. We allocate almost 30% every year to advertising, which is a chunk. But what that does is we approach it from a couple of different angles. There's image advertising, talking about options and the Options Industry Council. And then there is that call to action. Come to our classes, come to our website, take a class, listen to an audio podcast, call our Investor Services Center. So we keep driving that. Most of ours, print advertising is expensive, so most of ours is online advertising, email blasts, that kind of thing. Something that costs you nothing really is to work with the press and putting out press releases, educating them. That's been advantageous for us to sit with the financial press and talk to them about our markets, our product, et cetera. And we feed them metrics as appropriate, survey results, that kind of thing. So that's been very successful for us, working with the press. We talked about partnerships. We participate in a lot of conferences at all levels, at the retail investor level, financial advisors, and institutional investors. We set up exhibit booths. We try to get speaking roles on panels and get out there again and again and again, and that helps. Market research, we do a couple of different kinds. We want to understand retail investors and financial advisors. So we commission research, and we use those results and those findings in different ways. One is to assess our program and how it's being received. So we tweak programs based on that. Sometimes we use the findings. We've done repeated every 5 years a survey of options users versus non-options users, and we consistently find that options users are better educated, more self-directed, have more assets, and trade more products more often than non-options users. So that kind of information is something we'll tell financial advisors about, and they'll get involved and they'll learn. The institutional investor loves market research as well. So we'll commission studies about particular strategies. We go to University of Massachusetts and we publicize those findings, and it does draw institutional investors to us. Utilizing your database, people who have come to the site and looked, and you can capture some of that information and you can go back to them. You can do surveys, you can send out electronic newsletters. There's all sorts of ways you can work with them. And then last but not least, social media is an absolute must. You have to be in the game.
Great advice, thank you. Kathy?
Good morning, and thank you for asking me to participate. At the SEC, Office of Investor Education, we really look at 5 different functions that we're doing or how we do our office. And I just wanted to kind of go through them really quickly and give you some thoughts. The first thing we do is outreach. So we look at what are our segmented markets? And I would think for the CFTC, you have people who are using the product because they need to, such as farmers and those. You have investors, you have institutional investors, you have what I call your accidental investors, people who didn't know that they were investing in commodities, but now they're investing in commodities. And then you have the general public. They want to know why the gas prices are going up and down, and why is gold so high. So these are people who just need general information. And then you have your professionals. So looking at where do you want to target your investor outreach to reach which of these groups, and what does that look like, I think makes sense. The other thing that we do is content. And so we look at how do we make the content simple enough that people understand it. We aim for the 8th grade level, but complex enough that you cover all the information that they need. And this is really, almost an art form, and, kind of getting the information out there in bite-sized pieces. So, we used to talk about having the novice, apprentice, master, and grandmaster levels of content so that you can actually work through what do you know, how do you know it, and what do you need to know to go to the next level. Investing's not bad, and that you have to do investing to, prevent accumulation risk, but this is what you need to know to get started. This is what you need to know at the next level, and kind of working through that content piece. The next area that we really focus in is communication, and how do we get that message out. And one of the things that we really are very keen on, which I think would be important for the CFTC also, is branding. And how do we get that? Nobody's talked about that, but how do you get that branding out? And especially with CFTC, where it's not as well known out in the public, but making sure that there's a brand, a way that people look at your product, that automatically they think quality, they think unbiased, they think, this is the experts in the field. And we do it by color and design and a general feel of our publications and what they say and how they say it. So, just some thoughts on that and how that would work. We do it also by sending out alerts. We match, you talked earlier about how do you match what you're doing in terms of rulemaking and how that gets out. Well, once the rules are made and the information is done, we then help send that information to the public. We just did an investor alert on Say on Pay, for instance. And so we did an investor alert, and then we do info sheets that we send out, and then we give those out at conferences, and we put it up on the website. And it's not the rules and regulations that are up there, but so I don't always use the word interpretation, but that's the word that comes to mind, to make it more readable to the public. So taking that information, once it's out there, bringing it back out and putting it into a system to get out. Research is really important to us, understanding a couple things. That the programs that you're doing are research-based. So we're working on a teacher program with the New York Stock Exchange. They've done research on that this works and how many teachers it goes out to. We do savings and investing, outsmarting investment fraud. We've looked at the data. We know that there's data out there, and we work with that. So really looking at several different, and people talked about a lot of different kinds of research, but original research in terms of how is the accidental investor, for instance, learning about commodities. Are they getting it from professionals? Are they getting it because they just happen to go into websites? So once you have the data on how they're getting the information, you could then do some communications on what they need to know and when they need to know it, disclosures, those kinds of things. And the last is one that everybody's been talking about, and that's partnering. And we do partnering in several different ways with several different organizations, but one of the things that we're really focusing in on right now is using our regional offices and making sure that our regional offices have the most up-to-date information. We're doing wonderful programs in Colorado with our Denver office and with Savings Outsmarting Investment Fraud and our Boston office. And so we're really looking at how do we leverage not only the people that are the different groups inside the SEC, but also in those regional offices to expand our outreach and have them work with the local people that are out there too. So those are just some quick ideas.
Okay, that's great. I think this this communication, transforming, interpreting what we did yesterday would be incredibly difficult, but of course essential. You know, we have boiling it down and saying, you know, here's the press release, but here's what it means to, you know, all the lawyers in town. But this is what it means, and we don't have that capability at this point. I think that's
to the individual.
To the individual, the people who may ultimately use this. Great point. How do you leverage the rest of your building to make sure that you don't create a silo saying, oh, it's the consumer team again, they're bothering us again, they want some, you know, they want us to transform this into some other interpretation that we got to. How do you leverage that? How do you stand on your own but still access the resources throughout the whole building?
Well, we do it several different ways, but the most systemic way that we do it is that we have a policy division within investor education. So the deputy director for policy works with the people who are doing the rulemaking, trying to bring in the role of the individual investor, trying to get that information on the table, and then being able to work with them almost as the liaison to bring that information back to us so that we can do the investor outreach, knowing what's going on in the building, leveraging what's happening with the rulemaking. You know, we're doing tons of Dodd-Frank stuff right now, and getting kind of a say into the policies that are being made so that we can then leverage that out. We also try and gauge them. So last couple weeks ago, we did our first SEC shadowing program where we brought students in from the Academy of Finance program, and we got people from each of the divisions to participate in some of our programs and some of our outreach programs. So we do it in several different ways, and we just try and keep a large presence in the building, and so that we could reach the most number of people.
Do you have specific rule writing authority within your group? Would you, any consumer related, would you take that, or would that be another division then?
We would have another division.
You'd have another division. All right. Jeannie, did you mention that you had kind of writing authority?
Within our division, we have rule writing authority. And I'm an economist, not a lawyer. You don't want me writing rules.
All right. Thank you, though. You finished?
Yes.
Okay. Bob?
Okay, hi, I'm Bob Webster with NASA. We're the state and provincial securities regulator organization. We're based here in Washington. Our members are in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And I mentioned Canada up front. I would really encourage you to take a look at the work that our neighbors to the north are doing in social media. There's some great work being done up there, and I'd be glad to talk to you about some of that later on. One of the strengths of NASA and state securities regulators are we're in every state, so we have a great grassroots delivery vehicle. At NASA, we take advantage of that. We develop programs through our investor education section that we then make available to all of our members. Then our members, in turn, take those programs and use them, you know, at the very local level. We began an investor education program in 1997. Recently, we've restructured it, I think, based on a number of the ideas. You know, I've heard around here, I think a lot of us have been thinking along the same ways of developing messages, and then how do you deliver those messages? How do you communicate those? We have 2 project groups now that are responsible for developing new materials. An investor outreach group, which is responsible for coming up with 1 to 2 major outreach programs per year. Then we have an alerts and advisory group that works, I think, a little more responsive to what our enforcers are seeing on the streets. Lately, we've put out informed investor alerts on derivatives and gold, Earlier releases were on variable annuities. We've got some in the works now on social networking, peer-to-peer lending, and ETFs. We also have two other groups, a promotion and coordination group. This group takes the existing programs that we've developed and then looks for third-party partnerships. We've partnered with many people around the table. Partnerships are great. I can't underscore that enough. Leverage what's out there. Become part of the IE community. Our other group is an online outreach and social media. I think everybody is discovering this. You need to go where the audience is. Again, look at Canada. They're developing some pretty cool Facebook apps that are that have a good investor and consumer education outreach effort. One thing I've heard some of this group mention, and I think the previous panel talked about, is use your enforcement cases as teachable moments. Recently, I think it was last month, our North Carolina securities regulator worked with the CFTC on a Forex case. Those cases get media attention. You know, the attention is fleeting. You have to hit it that day. In your news releases, what we do, we've developed, we've heard a lot of talk about at the 8th grade level, we've just developed just a common sense message of investigate before you invest, or if it looks too good to be true, it usually is. Those messages are in our enforcement-related news releases that are put out by our members. They're simple. We reinforce them. They're out there all the time. You need to repeat these things. But strike while the iron's hot. If you have an enforcement case, if you're working with another regulator, a state regulator on a case, get out a good investor education component. It also helps if you know you have something in the works, develop a good consumer education piece that can go along with that. Many of the news articles you'll see on a case will also have a little news you can use box. That's where you want to be. You want to be in that little space because oftentimes people may read the headline, may not read the entire article, but they have time to read a 2 to 3 inch box, a little graphic. You want the CFTC to be in there with a link to your website and some information. One of the ways you can educate the media, work with them, do one-on-one visits. Look for journalism organizations. NIFI and NASA were both at a group called the Society of American Business Editors and Writers a couple of weeks ago in Dallas, where you have an opportunity to sit down one-on-one with business editors and writers. We also host seminars for journalists to teach them about the role of state securities regulators, kind of the common schemes. You know, they're interested in that. We're interested in getting our message out that who we are, what our members do, how we can benefit investors and play a role in investor protection. And the journalists also are interested in sources. They want to look to you as a source. I would also encourage you finally I've heard this around the table, try to merge the interest of your public affairs staff with your community affairs, community outreach, consumer affairs groups. Make sure those two groups are talking to one another so that when public affairs has got a release going out, consumer affairs is in there with them. When consumer affairs has something they want to promote, use the media contacts that you have with your public affairs staff to get that message out. Open it up to any questions.
That's a great idea, and especially with this local penetration, we've heard about it, and we do. We'll have these cases all over the country, and we can't predict where they're going to be, but we can't miss the opportunity to act on them and jump all over that opportunity to raise awareness, and we invariably will get local media. So it's a great idea. Any further thoughts? I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We're already over, and we knew this was a great content-laden group. All three panels have been outstanding. I've learned a lot from this. I think we've picked up a lot of ideas, and we've had staff here in the audience, so they've taken this in. We're going to circulate. I think we've kind of webcast all of this to our regional offices so they can think about it. It's being recorded and kept for our own benefit. This has not been webcast broadly, but within our own division. And it will be It was. Oh, it was or will be podcast. So there's our jumping all over that social media thing. But this has been very helpful to us, and I think we're going to need to continue to keep in touch on this stuff. Obviously, the partnership, if we don't, well, it's foolish, so we will be in touch. And then we've got some great material to figure out how we're going to put together our office and think about how we're going to grow this capacity. And I think you've given us some ideas about focusing, starting off with a target, building on that, looking at our research, and really leveraging what we know within the building to build an effective program. So, again, I can't thank all of you for sharing with us, and you've always thanked us for participating. It's really been our benefit to have you participate. So thank you very much for your contribution today. Thank you. Laura, do you have any closing thoughts you want to make? We'll have Laura translate this and share this with our staff. So thank you very much again.